Two children are sleeping in the corner of the shack. The 7-year-old boy looks sullen, even in his sleep. The 5-year-old girl clutches a dry crust of bread in her fist, because she doesn't believe there will be food tomorrow. Their father, a drunk, has drunk everything down to the last drop. Only now, a different man has awakened inside that father's body. A chef. And behind him, a door has opened to a pantry that shouldn't exist. But first, pain. Sharp pain. Someone is twisting a rusty nail between his ribs. Then the smell. Sour wine and urine. That's what a man smells like who hasn't washed in a week and has been drinking the whole time. A blow to the shin. "Get up, drunkard," a young woman's voice, angry with the kind of anger that builds up over years. He reaches out his hand. The hand won't obey. It isn't broken. It's someone else's. The fingers are thin and dirty. The nails are broken down to the flesh. He glances down. Skinny legs stick out from under a tattered blanket. Ribs protrude through the skin like the keys of an out-of-tune piano. This isn't his body. He realizes it immediately. His body weighed 92 kilograms and smelled of sesame oil, and this one weighs 50 and reeks of rice wine. Daniel So, 34 years old, head chef, Seattle, dead. The woman in the doorway throws out a name, So Jiho, flatly, without expression. That's what they call a person they long ago stopped considering human. He says that if he doesn't go out into the field again, he'll take the children to their mother, for good. And then someone else's memory washes over me, all at once, like a bucket of ice water. So Jiho, 29 years old, a tenant on Mr. Chedok Wan's land, a drunk, a slacker, a man who sold his own son's winter sandals to buy a jug of makgeolli, a man whose daughter hides the corks under her pillow, a man from whom his wife turns her back to the wall at night. Daniela is vomiting on the dirt floor, sour wine and nothing else. Even the bile is watery. This man hasn't eaten in a long time. The woman doesn't approach him. She doesn't hand him a rag. She just watches. Her name is Minsu, his wife, 29 years old, looks 40. She turns away, and that's when he feels it. Not pain, not nausea, a draft somewhere on the edge of consciousness, a door he forgot to close. He reaches for it in his mind, carefully, like a hot frying pan handle, and the door opens inside him. He sees rows of industrial stainless steel refrigerators, bags of real white rice, Japanese, Korean, Thai, not that rancid grain rotting in the corner of a hut. Bottles of soy sauce, fish sauce, sesame oil, miso, sugar, 3 kinds of salt, beef in the freezer, pork, salmon, and on the shelf, his knives. That very set of Japanese blades from his 25th birthday. He could recognize them by weight with his eyes closed. Frying pans, pots, a meat thermometer. And in the corner, another door, a small one, with a sign, U-O, feed. He jerks away. The door slams shut. He's back on the dirt floor. But his hands aren't shaking anymore. Minsu has gone to the well. The children are sleeping in the corner. Jungho and Hana. Not his, not this body's, but now they are his. Daniel stands up, grabs the wall. The clay crumbles under his fingers. The hut is tiny. 1 room, a hearth, a rusty pot, 1 intact bowl and 2 cracked ones. A small bag of rancid rice. In Seattle, he would have thrown this away without a second thought. Here, it's all that stands between 3 people and starvation. Minsu's footsteps fade away. The children are asleep. Now is the time. He reaches out again. The door opens more easily. His feet are on the earthen floor, but his hands are already on the shelf. A handful of real rice. The grains are dense and heavy, smelling of purity. 1 egg, a pinch of sea salt, a spoonful of soy sauce, a strip of dried kim seaweed, a small bottle of sesame oil, He brings it to his nose, and for a second he's standing in his own kitchen again. He hears the range hood. He feels the heat of the stove. Alive. The second ends. He closes the door. He stands by the hearth. The hands of this body are weak, but know just how to light a fire. The muscle memory of the former owner. Daniel lets her go. The fire catches. He rinses the rice 3 times, pours it into the pot, fills it with water, sets it on the fire, finds a knife. Dull, rusty, but a knife. He cuts the seaweed into thin strips, cracks an egg, beats it with chopsticks, takes the pot off the heat, divides it into 3 bowls, the 2 cracked ones closer to the children, the whole one further away for Minsu. Pours the egg on top, stirs, scatters the seaweed, a drop of sesame oil in each bowl, a spoonful of soy sauce. Karanbap, rice with egg, the simplest dish in the world. He's made it 1,000 times, on a hangover morning, for a late shift. A dish that requires no skill, just good ingredients and a touch of care. The aroma fills the hut, warm, nutty from the sesame. This scent cannot exist in this house. The house knows only the smell of rotten grain and vodka. And now it smells like real food. The girl wakes up first. She sits up, sniffs the air. Her eyes are huge and dark. She looks at Daniel, at the pot, back at Daniel. She silently crawls closer, still clutching the crust in her fist. The boy wakes up. He sees Daniel by the hearth, and his face instantly hardens. His jaw clenches. His eyes are angry and grown up. 7 years old, but with the eyes of an old man. He pulls his sister back, away from their father, away from the smell. Daniel doesn't approach, doesn't try to persuade her. He sets 3 bowls on the board, 2 cracked ones closer to the children. He places the chopsticks, sits to the side, and waits. Hana looks at the bowl, at her brother, at the bowl. Junho doesn't move, but his nostrils flare. He can smell it too. Hana frees her hand, crawls closer, picks up the chopsticks, hooks some rice, brings it to her mouth, and freezes. Looks at Daniel, as if asking for permission, or checking to see if he'll take it away. He nods. She puts the rice in her mouth, chews, and starts to cry, quietly. Tears stream down her cheeks as she eats, quickly, hungrily, shovels the rice in with chopsticks and her fingers, because it's delicious, because for the first time in a long time, it's delicious. Junho stands up, walks over, sits down next to her. He takes a bowl. He eats in silence. He doesn't cry, but his hands are shaking. Minsu returns with water. She freezes in the doorway. The bucket sways in her hand. Water splashes onto the floor. She looks at the children, at the bowls, at the steam, at the shiny drop of oil on the rice. She slowly lowers the bucket. She drops to her knees. She takes her bowl. She brings it to her face. She closes her eyes, sniffs, opens her eyes, asks where he got it. Not a question, a demand. Daniel sits down across from her, looks her in the eyes, promises to explain everything. But not today. Today, just eat. Minsu is silent for a long time. Then she picks up her chopsticks and eats, slowly, not greedily like children, like a person who's afraid this is a dream and that if they eat too fast, they'll wake up. She doesn't take her eyes off him. Daniel sits on the dirt floor in the body of a dead drunk in a world he doesn't know. His head is buzzing. His ribs are shooting with pain. Behind him hides a door to a pantry that shouldn't be there. And in front of him, 3 people are eating rice with egg. And 1 is crying. And this is the most important dish he has ever cooked in his entire life. Both lives. The bowls are emptying. Hana looks up. Her tears have dried. She looks at Daniel and says 1 word. More. He smiles. And this smile is his, not So Jiho's, his own. She says there will be more tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, too. Minsu turns away, but he notices. She presses her palm to her lips, and her shoulders shake. Once. Then she stands up. She gathers the bowls and walks out to the well. Her back is straight, her step is steady, like that of a person who doesn't allow herself to hope, yet. Daniel spent the rest of the day on reconnaissance. His body ached with every step, but he forced himself to leave the hut and look around. The village of Tebekgol lay on a mountainside between two ridges. 120 households. Half of them looked no better than his own ramshackle hut. Mud brick walls, thatched roofs, patches upon patches. A single well served half the village, and there was a line for it from dawn. The second well belonged to the village headman, and people had to pay for water from it. Rice fields stretched down the slope. Even to a city dweller's eye, it was clear that the land was exhausted. The stalks were thin. The ears of rice were sparse. It was the third year of crop failure, and you could feel it in everything. In the way people moved, slowly, conserving their strength. In the way they looked at one another. With that cautious squint with which one looks at a neighbor when there is little food and many mouths to feed. So Jiho's memory offered fragments. Landowner Chaedok-wan had doubled the rent. The war tax. War in the north. Nomads. Rumors crept from market to market, but by the time they reached the village, they were already distorted by fear. Either the steppe nomads had burned 3 towns, or the royal army was conscripting all men between the ages of 16 and 40, or the plague was coming from the west. No one knew the truth, but everyone knew one thing. Half the households wouldn't survive until winter. Daniel walked along the path between the huts and counted. It was a professional habit of his. A head chef always counts. How many servings? How many ingredients? How much time? How many hands? 120 households. Let's say 4 or 5 people per household. 500 to 600 mouths to feed. The rice fields are yielding less and less. No salt. No meat. Almost no vegetables. He stopped at the edge of the field and crouched down. He took a handful of soil. He crumbled it between his fingers. Dry, clayey, heavy, but not dead. This soil can be worked, if you know how. In his pantry, on a shelf, lay packets of seeds. Potatoes, corn, tomatoes, chili peppers, squash, sunflowers. Crops this world had never seen. Crops that could change everything. But they were a long way off. Right now, the task was simpler. Survive until tomorrow. Feed everyone today. He returned to the hut when the sun was at its zenith. Minsu was working in the field. He saw her figure on the lower terrace, her back bent, her movements measured. For 6 years she had carried this family on her own. 6 years while the body he inhabited drank away its last. Jung-ho was in the field too. The 7-year-old boy was hauling water in a bucket that came up to his waist. Hana sat alone by the hut. She was molding something round out of the mud. She saw Daniel and froze. A serious face, alert eyes. But she didn't run away. The morning rice and egg had earned him that. A small vote of confidence from a 5-year-old child. Daniel crouched down next to her. He asked what she was making. Hana paused. Then she said it was a pie. Daniel looked at the lump of mud. He nodded seriously. He said the shape was good, but it needed more filling. Hana looked at him like he was crazy. Then the corner of her mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. She asked if dinner would be like breakfast. Daniel said it would be better. Hana froze again. She was thinking it over. Then she went back to her mud pie. The conversation was over. But she was sitting closer than before, half a step. Daniel waited until she went to play behind the hut. He listened. No one around. He opened the door. In the pantry, he moved quickly. He took some flour, a little, a handful, a pinch of yeast, salt, a small piece of pork from the freezer, a head of garlic, ginger, a bottle of vegetable oil, and one skillet. Cast iron, heavy. The very one he'd bought on sale at a Korean store in Seattle 6 years ago. It was perfect for frying. He carried everything out and hid it under the floorboards by the wall. He wrapped the skillet in a rag. Then he sat down and began to think. A legend. He needed a legend. Where would a village drunkard get flour and meat? So Jiho's memory stirred reluctantly, murky, fragmented. But he found something useful. Jiho had an uncle, So Manbok, a traveling merchant. He hadn't been seen in 5 years, most likely dead, but no one in the village knew for sure. Daniel pieced together a story. Uncle Manbok had sent word through a merchant at the market, said he was alive and well. He'd left a small stash by the road for his nephew, as a gift. Weak, but for a village where half the news is just retold rumors, it would do, for the time being. In the evening, he was cooking. Minsu returned from the fields when the shadows grew long. She stopped at the door. She sniffed the air. Yesterday's karambap could be chalked up to a fluke, but today the hut smelled different. Daniel was frying meat in a cast iron skillet with garlic and ginger. Thin slices of pork sizzled on the hot cast iron. The fat melted. The garlic turned golden. The smell rose up and seeped through every crack in the walls. Minsu stood and watched. Jung-ho stood behind her. He was watching too, his mouth slightly open. His eyes were hungry, not angry. For the first time all day, not angry, just hungry. Daniel set out dinner, rice from local supplies. He had rinsed it 7 times and cooked it just right. Even bad rice, if you rinse it and cook it with the exact amount of water, becomes tolerable. With the rice was roasted pork with garlic. The portions were small. He couldn't afford too much. Every piece of meat from the pantry had to be justified. Every spoonful of oil demanded an explanation. Minsu sat down. She picked up her chopsticks. She didn't eat. She asked where the meat came from. Daniel told her about Uncle Manbok, a merchant at the market. He'd sent a package, a little flour, a little dried meat, a gift from a relative. Minsu listened. Her expression didn't change. She didn't believe a single word. Daniel could see that. But she didn't argue. She looked at the children. She looked at the meat in the pan, and she began to eat. Jung-ho ate in silence, quickly, covering the bowl with his hand, a hungry child's habit, to protect the food, to hide it. Hana ate more slowly. She picked up each piece with chopsticks, brought it to her nose, sniffed, then put it in her mouth, chewed for a long time, with her eyes closed, the serious face of a little critic. Daniel looked at her and felt something tighten in his chest. Newspaper critics used to come to his restaurant in Seattle. He was nervous before each one, but none of them was as important as the 5-year-old girl with dirty knees who sniffed the roast pork with an expression on her face as if she were deciding the fate of the world. Hana finished eating. She put down her chopsticks. She looked at Daniel. She said one word. Good. Not great, not excellent. Good. Daniel nodded seriously. He accepted the grade. Hana nodded back and went to bed, businesslike, stern. 5 years old. After dinner, Minsu washed the bowls. Daniel sat by the hearth and watched the coals. She came back and sat across from him. She was silent. He waited. She said she didn't know what game he was playing. She said she'd seen it before. When he swore he'd quit drinking, when he promised to go out into the fields, when he said everything would change. And every time, 3 days later, he'd be lying in a pool of his own vomit while she explained to the kids why Appa couldn't get up again. She said that if this was just another one of those times, she wouldn't survive it. Not physically. Inside. Something inside her would break for good. And she would take the children and leave and never look back. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make excuses. When she fell silent, he said only one thing. That he wasn't asking her to believe him, he was asking her to wait a week, just 1 week. And if in a week she saw what she had seen before, he himself would help her pack her things. Minsu looked at him for a long time. In the light of the coals, her face looked different. Young, beautiful, tired. She said, "A week." And she stood up and went to the children. She lay down on the mat, turned her back to the wall, just like every night. Daniel lay down on his side. Between them was 1/2 meter of earthen floor. 1/2 meter and 6 years of someone else's hatred. He closed his eyes. The sign on the pantry door popped into his head. You owe. Feed. He didn't know who he owed. He didn't know why it was him. But he knew one thing. Tomorrow morning, he would get up before everyone else, and he would make breakfast. The week began with rain. It pounded on the thatched roof and seeped in through 3 places. Daniel woke up in the dark. His body ached. The muscles he'd used yesterday to chop wood were burning with fire. So Jiho's hands weren't used to work. 6 years of idleness had turned them into rags. But his mind was clear, clearer than ever. He got up before dawn. He checked. Minsu and the children were asleep. No one outside. The rain had even driven away the early neighbors. He opened the pantry door. Today he took more. Flour, eggs, sugar, a pinch of cinnamon, and yeast. A small packet of dry yeast. He knew it was a risk. Yeast in this world existed, but in a primitive form. Sourdoughs that fermented for weeks. His yeast worked in an hour. If anyone saw the dough rise that fast, the questions would be very uncomfortable. But Daniel decided to take the risk. The children needed bread. He needed the dough. Flour and water and an egg and a pinch of salt and sugar and yeast. His hands remembered the motions. Thousands of kneadings over a lifetime. In culinary school. In the first restaurant where he worked for pennies. In his own establishment. The dough under his hands was obedient. Alive. He covered the bowl with a rag and set it by the hearth. While the dough was rising, he set to work on the roof. 3 holes. Water dripped onto the floor, forming puddles. The hut was made of old planks and bundles of straw. He climbed up. Rain lashed his face. His fingers slipped. So Jiho's body was light, and that helped. He patched 2 of the 3 holes. The third required nails, which he didn't have. When he came down, the dough had doubled in size. He divided it into small flatbreads. He rolled each one out with his palms. He laid them in the pan. He fried them over low heat, flipping them with a wooden spatula he had carved from a branch the day before. The flatbreads puffed up. They became covered in golden spots. The aroma filled the hut. Warm, bready, alive. Hana woke up and sat up on her bedding. She looked at the pan. She looked at Daniel. She asked what it was. Daniel said it was bread. Hana thought for a moment. She said that bread isn't round. Bread comes in lumps of burnt porridge. Daniel replied that it can also be round. Hana crawled closer. She picked up a flatbread. It was hot. She had to pass it from hand to hand. She took a bite. She chewed. Her face changed. Her eyes grew wide. She said it was soft and sweet and warm inside. Daniel nodded. He said that tomorrow he would put a filling inside. Hana looked at him very seriously. She said she wanted a sweet one. Daniel said it would be sweet. It was their first normal conversation. No fear, no wariness. Just a father and daughter discussing bread filling. Junho didn't approach. He sat by the wall and watched. But when Daniel placed a flatbread next to him on the floor and stepped back, the boy waited a minute. 2. Then he took it. He ate with his back turned, hiding, but he ate. Minsu tried the flatbread in silence. She turned it over in her hands, squeezed it. The dough was springy. In this world, bread was dense and heavy, burnt porridge dried on a stone. This was different. She asked where he had learned to make it. Daniel said his mother's mother used to bake them. A long time ago, he remembered. Half a lie. Daniel's grandmother did indeed bake them, but not like this, and not here, and not in this world. Minsu didn't believe him, but again, she didn't argue. She ate the flatbread down to the last crumb, and that was enough. Day 3. The rain had stopped. Daniel went out into the field, for the first time, so Jiho's body knew the movements. Bending over, pulling weeds, checking the roots. But his arms were weak, and after an hour, he sat down on the ground, gasping for breath. Minsu was working nearby. She didn't look at him, but he could tell she was noticing. Noticing that he had gone out. Noticing that he was trying. An old woman from the neighboring plot stopped and stared at him. Her mouth was open. Apparently, So Jiho in the field was an event as rare as a solar eclipse. Daniel nodded at her. The old woman snapped her mouth shut. She muttered something and walked away. By evening, the whole village knew about it. So the drunkard had gone out into the field, alone. No cane, no threats, alone. Day 4. Daniel fixed the door. It had been hanging on a single hinge ever since Jiho kicked it while drunk 2 months ago. He had no tools. He found a stone of the right shape and a piece of wire. 2 hours of work. The door hung straight. It closed without a squeak. A small thing. But Minsu looked at the door that evening, then at Daniel, and for the first time in days, her eyes weren't piercing. Just surprised. Day 5. Daniel got up before dawn. He made breakfast. Rice porridge with an egg and finely chopped greens he'd gathered yesterday by the stream. Then he went to the well. He drew water. 4 buckets. He carried them into the house. Minsu came out and saw the full buckets by the wall. She froze. 6 years. For 6 years, she had gone to the well alone every morning. 4 buckets. The rope cut into her palms. The buckets were heavy. The path was slippery after the rain. 6 years. Not once in 6 years had So Jiho brought her water. She stood there looking at the buckets and said nothing. Then she went out into the field. But her gait was different, a little softer, a little slower, as if she were carrying something fragile. Hope, perhaps, or the fear of hope. Day 6. In the evening, a neighbor came to the hut. A young woman with eyes red from crying and a loud voice. Son Yuna. Daniel recognized her from Jiho's memories. A widow. Her husband had died in the war a year ago. She lived with her mother-in-law 3 houses down. Yuna came to ask for a light. Her fire had gone out. Daniel gave her a burning twig. Yuna took it and sniffed it. She asked what the smell was. The scent of dinner wafted from the hut. Rice with vegetables. Nothing special. But for this village, where dinner was a bowl of plain porridge, the smell of cooked vegetables with a drop of oil was the scent of another world. Yuna stood there, breathing in the air, her eyes closed, her nostrils flared. For a second, she forgot about the fire in her hand and smiled. Then she caught herself. She thanked them. She left. But Daniel saw it. He saw that moment when the smell of food pierced through the armor of grief and exhaustion and drew out something genuine from the person. For a single second. But it did break through. He remembered it. Day 7. A week. In the morning, Daniel made breakfast as usual. Rice, an egg, seaweed, sesame oil. He added some flatbreads to that. He divided it into 4 bowls. 4, not 3. The 4th was for himself, for the first time in a week. Before that, he'd only eaten leftovers, or not eaten at all. The pantry didn't restock supplies for meals he cooked for himself, only for meals he cooked for others. But today it was necessary. He had to sit down at the table with them, like a family. Minsu came out from behind the wall where she'd been sleeping with the children. She looked at the 4 bowls, at the flatbreads, at the steam. She walked over. She sat down. The children sat down beside her. Hana reached for her bowl as usual. Jung-ho sat down silently. They ate, all 4 of them, together, in silence. When the bowls were empty, Minsu looked up. She looked at Daniel. She said the week had passed. Daniel nodded. She paused. She said she didn't understand what had happened to him. She didn't understand where the food came from, or where the cooking skills came from, or where the water in the buckets came from every morning, or where the lista, and where this man sitting in front of her came from, because this wasn't the man she had married. Daniel was silent. Minsu said she was giving him 1 more week. She stood up. She went out to the well. But today, the buckets were full. She stood there for a moment. She came back. She took the basket for the field. And as she was leaving, she turned around at the threshold. She said the flatbreads were delicious. And she left. Daniel sat on the floor and breathed. Delicious. She said delicious. The first kind word in 7 days. In 7 days of this life, and in 6 years of this body's past life, 1 word, delicious. He clenched his fists. His nails dug into his palms, not out of anger, because 1 word could mean so much. Hana walked over to him, stood beside him, placed her hand on his knee, a small, dirty hand. She said that Appa was a good cook. Daniel placed his hand over hers. He said that tomorrow would be even better. Hana nodded, seriously, as if she were signing a contract. The second week was the week of hands. Daniel understood that 1 meal wouldn't save the family. The hut was falling apart. The roof was leaking. The floor was dirt and turned to mud after every rain. The children slept on thin mats that offered no warmth. Minsu did laundry in ice-cold water, and her hands were cracked and bleeding. He needed tools. A set hung on the wall in the storage room. A hammer, nails, a saw, a chisel, pliers. The rule was simple. Take it out once and it's yours forever, but there won't be a second chance. Every tool must be used wisely. He waited until dawn on the 2nd day of the 2nd week. Minsu had gone out to the fields. The children were with her. Hana now went with her mother. She didn't help, too small, but she sat nearby on the field's edge and molded her mud horns. Daniel opened the storage room. He took a hammer, a saw, a handful of nails. He wrapped them in a rag. He hid them in the house, a legend for the tools. He thought for 2 days and found it. In a ditch behind the village lay an old shed. It had collapsed last winter. It belonged to no one. Daniel went there. He rummaged around. He returned with a hammer and nails that he supposedly found under the rubble, rusty. He deliberately rubbed the new nails against a rock and soaked them in mud. Not perfect, but good enough. Minsu looked at the tools. She looked at him. She said nothing. For 3 days he worked on the roof. Proper work, not straw plugs like in the first week. He dismantled the damaged section. He cut new beams from branches he'd hauled from the forest, nailed them down, laid the straw in even layers, tamped it down, sealed it with clay. When the next rain came 2 days later, the roof held, not a single drop inside. Minsu stood in the middle of the hut and looked up. A dry ceiling. For the first time in 3 years, Jung Ho was looking up too. The boy was looking at Daniel more and more often in general. He didn't come over. He didn't speak. But he watched his every move. When Daniel chopped wood, Jung Ho sat 10 paces away and watched. When Daniel repaired the wall, the boy came closer. On the 9th day overall, Jung Ho picked up a stone and brought it to the wall. He placed it silently, right next to where Daniel was patching the hole, and he left. The stone was the right size. It fit the hole perfectly. The boy had watched long enough to know what kind of stone was needed. Daniel took the stone. He set it into the wall. He said nothing. Sometimes silence is better than any words. On the 10th day, what Daniel had been waiting for and feared at the same time, the village headman came to the hut. Park Jong-soo, a man in his 50s, flabby, with a red face. He drank a lot, but managed the village somehow. Jiho's memory told him that the headman wasn't evil, just weak, going with the flow, doing whatever Manager Cho told him to do. He collected taxes. He drank to forget how much he'd collected. Park Jong-soo stopped by the hut. He looked at the roof. A new roof. He looked at the door. A new door. He sniffed the air. The smell of dinner wafted from the hut. Daniel was just cooking rice with vegetables, local vegetables. He found a pitiful bunch of green onions and a couple of turnips at the market outside the village. He bought them with a copper coin from Jiho's pocket, his last coin. But he dressed it all with sesame oil and soy sauce from the pantry. The difference was like that between a sip of water and a sip of broth. The village elder cleared his throat. He said he'd heard the news. He's working with Jiho. He's fixing up the house with Jiho. He's not drinking with Jiho. 10 days. He said that was good. The community is happy. Then he hesitated. He looked away. He said that in a week, Mr. Cho's manager would come to collect taxes. Increased. Doubled. A war tax. Whoever doesn't pay will lose their land or give their son as a laborer or a daughter. Daniel stood and listened. His fingers tightened around the wooden shovel. He'll give up his daughter, Hana, 5-year-old Hana with her mud pies and serious face. He asked how much. The village head named the sum, 5 mien of silver per household, 600 mien for the whole village. An insane sum. Half the households didn't even have a single nien. Daniel asked when. The village headman said in 7 days, and left. Shoulders slumped. His step was heavy. A man who carries bad news from house to house all day long. Daniel returned to the hearth. He stirred the rice. He thought, 5 nien of silver. He had no silver. The pantry held food and tools, but no money. He could feed his family, but he couldn't pay the tax. So he had to earn it. In 7 days. In a village where people have no money. He thought about it all evening. Minsu noticed his silence. She asked what the village head had said. Daniel told her, 5 nyan, a week. Minsu didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She already knew. All day in the field, that was all they'd talked about. She said the Kim neighbors didn't have a single one. Old Pei had nothing. Widow Yuna still owed from the last harvest. Daniel listened. He calculated, as always. Portions, food, time, hands. And an idea came to him. Simple, like all good ideas. The market. Once every 10 days, at the fork in the road, a market gathered at midday. Merchants, travelers, peasants from the surrounding villages. At the market, they paid, with copper and sometimes silver. At the market, you could sell. The question was, what? Daniel closed his eyes. He leafed through his recipe archive. Photographic memory. Thousands of dishes. Thousands of recipes. What could be made from local ingredients with pantry additions? Something unfamiliar, but not intimidating. Something you could eat with your hands while standing at the market. Something cheap to make, but luxurious to eat. Hotdog. Sweet, filled pastries. Dough made from flour and yeast, filled with brown sugar and cinnamon, fried in oil for 2 minutes. Hot. Crispy on the outside, soft and sweet on the inside. In Seattle, he sold them at festivals for $3 apiece. People stood in line for 40 minutes. Here, no one had ever tried anything like this. Here, the only sweet thing was honey, if you were lucky, or dried persimmons, or nothing. He opened his eyes. He looked at Min. He said he was going to the market, that he would make something and sell it. Minsu looked at him. She asked what he was going to sell. Daniel said, flatbreads. Minsu blinked. Flatbreads. He was going to make 5 nien of silver a week selling flatbreads. She didn't say he was crazy. She just got up and went to the children. But at the threshold, she turned around. She said that if he needed help kneading the dough, she would get up early. And she left. Daniel sat by the extinguished hearth, in the darkness. Minsu offered to help, for the first time. He hadn't asked. She did it on her own. I'll get up early. I'll help knead it. He rubbed his face with his palms. The skin was rough, alien, but the tears on it were his own. Daniel spent 3 days preparing for the market. He got up before dawn. He opened the pantry. He took the flour, a lot, 3 little bags, sugar, cinnamon, oil for frying, yeast. He hid each portion separately, some under the floorboards in the house, some in a hole behind the hut that he dug out at night, some in a tree hollow by the stream. No one see the entire stash at once. The cover story for the flour was simple. He'd say he traded for it with a passing merchant. For work. What kind of work? People would ask. I fixed his wagon, Daniel would say. In a village where every man had been fixing wagons his whole life, it was plausible. Sugar was a problem. In this world, sugar was expensive. Ordinary peasants hadn't seen it in years. Daniel decided to use honey. Partly real honey from the pantry. Partly honey he would buy from a beekeeper in the neighboring village. What would he buy it with? He had no money. He went to the beekeeper. The old man lived on the outskirts. 10 hives. The honey was liquid, dark, with a hint of wild herbs. Daniel proposed a barter. He would fix the old man's fence around the hives, which had fallen to pieces. The old man would fix his wallet with a jar of honey. The beekeeper looked at him with the same expression as everyone else in the village. So Jiho offers a job. That happens. But the fence really was in terrible shape. The beekeeper agreed. Daniel worked for half a day. A hammer, nails, branches. By evening, the fence stood straight. The beekeeper brought out a pot of honey. A big one. Bigger than he'd promised. He looked at the work, scratched his chin, said that if So wanted more honey, he should come by. There would be work. His first business contact. Daniel carried the pot home and thought. So that's how it works. Not magic, not the pantry. Hands, work, exchange. The pantry provides a foundation. It provides food that isn't available here. It provides knowledge. But everything else has to be built by oneself. Through labor, through people, through trust that is earned millimeter by millimeter. 2 days before the market, he started preparing the dough. At night, when everyone was asleep, he mixed it in batches: flour, water, yeast, a pinch of salt. The dough had risen by morning. He divided it into balls, each the size of a fist, wrapped them in a cloth. He placed them in a basket. He made the filling separately: honey mixed with cinnamon and granulated sugar. Thick, sticky, sweet. He tasted it. Good. Not perfect. A real hot talk requires brown sugar and ground nuts. But in a world where sweets are a luxury, this filling was a treasure. In the morning, before the market, Minsu got up while it was still dark, just as she had promised. She walked over to the table. She looked at the dough. She touched it with her finger. Soft, springy. She had never touched dough like this before. Daniel showed her how to shape the balls, how to place the filling in the center, how to pinch the edges. Minsu did it in silence. Her fingers were precise, quick. The hands of a woman who had worked with her hands her whole life. An hour later, they had 60 balls of dough with filling, 60 hot talk. Daniel arranged them in 2 baskets. He grabbed a frying pan, a bottle of oil, branches for a fire. Minsu watched him get ready. She said she'd go with him. Daniel looked at her. She said someone had to make sure he didn't give it all away for free. It was a joke. The first joke in all this time. Her voice was steady. Her face was serious. But it was a joke. Daniel didn't smile. Not because he didn't want to, because if he had smiled, she would have closed herself off again. He just nodded, said he needed her help. She nodded back. They left the children with Yuna. A widowed neighbor agreed to watch them. Hana left calmly. Junho pressed his lips together, but stayed. The trip to the market took 4 hours, not half a day. Daniel walked faster than he expected. His body had grown stronger over those 2 weeks. Regular meals and work had done their job. Minsu walked beside him, silently. Carrying the baskets was hard. Daniel took both. Minsu took one back, without asking. She shared the weight, silently. The market was large, larger than he'd expected. 300 people, maybe 4. Merchants had set up awnings along the road. Fabrics, clay pottery, ropes, grain, dried fish, salt, everything gray and dull, as if the very air here had faded. Daniel found an open spot at the edge of the square. He built a fire. set down a skillet, poured in oil. While the oil was heating, he rolled out the first ball of dough. With his palms, a flatbread the size of his palm, filling inside. He placed it in the pan. The oil sizzled. The dough began to fry. Golden, crispy. The aroma rose. Honey, cinnamon, fried dough. In a world where half the people ate plain porridge, this smell was like a blow. A girl of about 10 was the first to approach. Dirty, barefoot, she stood 3 steps away and stared at the pan. Her eyes were huge. Daniel flipped the flatbread. A golden crust. The oil glistened. He took the hotdog off the pan, placed it on a wooden board, broke it open. Inside, the honey and cinnamon had melted into a hot, sweet mass. Steam rose. The girl swallowed. 3 others were standing behind her now. An old man, a woman holding a child, a guy in his 20s. Everyone was watching. Daniel held out half the flatbread to the girl, for free. She grabbed it. She took a bite. Burned her tongue, jumped up and down on the spot. But she didn't spit it out. She chewed with her mouth open, blowing on her tongue, and she smiled. Minsu stood nearby and watched. Daniel looked at her. He said the first one was free. The rest were 2 copper coins apiece. Minsu nodded. She took the board, stood in front of the awning, and began to sell. He hadn't expected this. Didn't expect Minsu to be able to talk to people like that. She invited them, explained. Here are the flatbreads. Sweet, hot, 2 coins. Her voice was steady, calm, without fuss, without shouting. People approached. The first ones cautiously. One tried it, a second, a third. The face of the first customer, an old man, about 60, few teeth. He took a bite of the hotdog and froze. Chewed slowly. His eyes widened. He swallowed. He looked at the flatbread. He looked at Daniel. He asked what it was. Daniel said it was a hotdog, a honey flatbread. The old man asked where it was from. Daniel said the recipe was old, a family recipe. The old man nodded. He finished it, bought a second one for his wife. By noon, there was a line of 20 people. Daniel fried nonstop. The skillet never cooled down. The oil sizzled. The flatbreads flew off the pan one after another. Minsu counted the money. Copper coins poured into a small bag. 1, 2, 10, 20. By the end of the day, they had sold all 60. Daniel stood by the dying fire. His hands smelled of oil and honey. His back ached. His legs were buzzing. Minsu untied the pouch. She poured the coins onto a board. She counted. 120 copper coins. At this world's exchange rate, roughly 1 nien of silver. 1 out of 5. In a single day. Minsu counted again, then a third time. She looked at Daniel. She didn't say a word, but her eyes were different. Not piercing, not cautious, burning. She said it was 4 days to the market. If they made twice as many flatbreads, Daniel said that twice as many would be 120. They'd need more flour, more honey, more oil, and they'd need a second pan. Minsu said that the widow Yuna had an old pan, rusty but intact, and Yuna needed money for taxes. Daniel nodded. The idea was simple, like all good ideas. Call Yuna, give her a job, split the profits. 2 pans, 2 sellers, twice as many flatbreads, twice as much money. On the way back, they walked in silence. The baskets were empty. A small bag of coins hung from Minsu's belt. She held it close with her hand, like something alive. When they were half an hour from the village, Minsu said he was a different person. Daniel didn't answer. She said she didn't know how to explain it. Same voice, same face, but different. As if someone had let the old Jiho out and let someone new in. Daniel walked and said nothing. His heart was pounding. She was almost right. Almost. Minsu said she didn't care who he was, that only one thing mattered to her, that the children were fed, that the roof didn't leak, that the morning smelled of food. If this new Jiho could provide that, then she would stay by his side. Not because she loved him, because of the children. Daniel said he understood, and that it was enough. For now, at least. Minsu nodded, and they walked on. Side by side, without touching each other, but side by side. In the village, Hana met them. She ran out to greet them, a serious face. She asked if Appa had brought her anything. Daniel took a hot dog out of his pocket, the last one. He'd saved it for her. Hana took it, took a bite, chewed, closed her eyes. She opened them. She delivered her verdict. Dad, you're a genius. And she went off to share it with her brother. Minsu stood nearby. She watched her daughter walk away, and the corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, a shadow of a smile, a ghost of a smile. But Daniel saw it, and that was enough. For the rest of the evening, for the whole night, for the whole of tomorrow. There were 4 days left until tax collection. 1 neon of silver lay in a pouch under the floorboards. 4 were missing. Daniel didn't sleep. He lay on the earthen floor and counted. 60 hot talk brought 1 neon. That meant he needed 300. 300 flatbreads in 2 market days. It was possible if he did everything right. In the morning, he went to Yuna's. The widow lived 3 houses down. Her hut was even worse than his own. The walls were crooked. In the yard, her deaf mother-in-law sat sorting through pebbles. Yuna stepped out onto the threshold, red eyes. She hadn't slept. Daniel explained briefly. The market, flatbreads, need help. A second frying pan, a second cellar. Split the profits after covering expenses. Yuna listened. Her face changed. First, disbelief. Then, calculation. Then, something like hunger. Not physical, the hunger of a person who'd been offered a job after a year of idleness. She asked how much he'd earned at the market. Daniel said, 1 yen. Yuna blinked. 1 yen a day selling flatbreads. She earned 1/4 of a yen a month doing laundry for wealthy households. She said she had a frying pan, a rusty one, but she'd clean it up. She said she'd be ready tomorrow. Daniel nodded. He turned away. Yuna called out to him. She stood in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. She said that if this was a joke, she didn't find it funny. Daniel looked her in the eyes. He said that tomorrow, at 4 a.m, at his house, the dough would be ready. And he left. The next 2 days turned into a production line. At night, Daniel opened the pantry and took out flour. Lots of flour. He understood that the pantry's supplies were not endless. The basic ingredients replenished themselves within a day, but he was using them up faster than they appeared. The flour was dwindling. The shelves were getting emptier. It was a debt that had to be repaid by cooking for others. The more complex the dish and the more people he fed, the faster the pantry would be replenished. Hotok was considered a market staple. Every flatbread sold brought back a little. But not everything. The balance was fragile. He kneaded the dough in batches of 30. Minsu shaped the balls. Her fingers had memorized the movements from the very first time. Quick, precise, not a single wasted movement. Daniel watched her hands and thought that in another life she would have been a brilliant chef, or a surgeon, or a sculptor. Hands that understand the material at first touch. Yuna arrived at the appointed hour. A dark night, a torch in her hand, a frying pan under her arm, polished to a shine. Daniel showed her how to fry. Oil in the pan. Not much, a thin layer, medium heat. Put the flatbread in when the oil starts to smoke slightly. 2 minutes on one side, 1.5 minutes on the other. A golden crust. Not dark, not pale, golden. Yuna tried. She burned the first 3 flatbreads. The 4th wasn't cooked through. The 5th turned out right. She lifted it from the pan and looked at it. A perfect circle. The crust was the right color. Inside, the filling had melted. Yuna smiled. Widely. Brightly. the first smile Daniel had seen on her face. She said her hands remembered. Her husband used to say her hands remembered everything. Then the smile faded, but not completely. A shadow remained at the corners of her lips. By dawn, they had 150 dough balls. Minsu shaped them. Yuna helped. Daniel monitored the filling. Honey, cinnamon, sugar. Every ball was identical, each with a precisely measured portion. Quality control, the foundation of the restaurant business. The second market went differently. Now there were 3 of them. Daniel was frying in one pan, Yuna in the second. Minsu was selling. And Minsu took charge. Daniel watched out of the corner of his eye and couldn't believe it. She wasn't just standing there waiting. She was walking around, approaching people, striking up conversations, offering samples. Her voice was soft, but something new had appeared in it. Confidence. Not in the flatbreads, in herself. She stood behind her merchandise, behind the work of her hands. For the first time in 6 years, she stood behind something that had value, and people could feel it. By noon, they had sold 100. By sunset, 140. They kept 10 for dinner. Minsu counted the coins, 280 copper ones, almost 3 nanas, plus 1 from the first market. 4. 1 was missing. Daniel sat by the dying fire, thinking. Yuna approached. She said she had half a nana, saved up from 6 months of laundry. She'd give them to him. Daniel looked at her. Yuna shrugged. She said she was going to spend them on the rent anyway, and she had nothing to pay the rent with, so at least it would cover the tax. Daniel shook his head. He said he wouldn't take it. Yuna needed that money. Yuna raised an eyebrow. She said he needed it too. He had 2 kids. She only had her mother-in-law, who didn't even understand what was going on. Minsu stepped in, quietly. She said they'd take it, and pay it back, from the profits of the next market. Yuna nodded, businesslike, calm, as if she'd just closed a business deal, rather than handed over her last savings to a near stranger. 4.5 nannies, half was missing. Daniel thought about it all the way home, and the decision came, not from him, from Hana. The girl was sitting by the hut, waiting. When they approached, she stood up, a serious face. She held out her hand. A copper coin lay in her palm. 1. Old. Tarnished. Hana said she'd found it by the stream, under a rock. Daniel took the coin. He looked at it. It wasn't just a coin. It was an old minting, 50 years old or more. Coins like that were now worth more than their face value. Collectors at the market paid for them. Jiho's memory confirmed it. There was a dealer in the county town. He bought up old coins. He paid in silver. A single old-style coin was worth between 1/4 and half a nian, depending on its condition. Daniel looked at Hannah. The girl stood there, waiting for an appraisal, serious, focused. 5 years old. She found the coin and brought it to her father. She didn't hide it. She didn't lose it. She brought it. Daniel crouched down in front of her. He told her she was a good girl. Hannah nodded. She asked if it was enough. Daniel said it might be enough. Hannah turned and went to her brother to report. The next morning, Daniel set off for the county town, a 3-hour walk. He found a merchant, an old man in a shop crammed with all sorts of junk. He showed him the coin. The old man took it, turned it over. His eyes sparkled. He offered 1/4 of a nian. Daniel shook his head. The coin was in good condition. The minting was clear. The edges were smooth. He said half a nian. The old man haggled. Daniel stood silently. He remembered how to haggle, not from this life, from the last one. Suppliers in Seattle, wholesale markets, Pike Place Fish Market. There, if you show weakness, they'll eat you alive. Silence is a weapon. Whoever speaks first loses. The old man spoke up. He offered 3/8 of a nian. Daniel remained silent. The old man sighed. Half a nian. A silver coin landed in his palm, heavy, cool. Daniel returned to the village by evening. 5 silver niens, exactly. Tax collection day turned out to be cold. The morning fog lay over the valley like a wet blanket. Mr. Cho's steward arrived on horseback. 3 servants accompanied him, all in dark robes, their faces stern, professional collectors. They went from yard to yard, a knock on the door, a demand, pay up or face the consequences. Daniel heard crying from the neighboring huts. A woman's voice begged for another week. A man's voice rasped that there was no money, no grain, nothing. A child's crying. The steward approached their door. He knocked. Daniel opened it. A man in his 40s, thin lips, eyes that looked at people as if they were entries in an account book. He gave a name, So Jiho, 5 neon. Daniel took out a small pouch. He poured the coins into the manager's palm. 5 neon, exactly. The manager counted, recounted. He looked at Daniel. For the first time all day, an expression appeared on his face. Surprise. So Jiho, a drunk, a deadbeat. Not once in 6 years had he paid on time, and here he stood, sober, paying the full amount. The manager put the coins away, made a note in the book, turned and walked off to the next yard. Didn't say a word, but Daniel saw it, saw him look back, once. A quick glance over his shoulder, at the shack with the new roof, at the door that closes smoothly, at the smoke from the chimney smelling of baked dough. The overseer remembered, and that was bad. In the evening, the village was quiet, that eerie silence that settles in after a disaster. Of the 120 households, less than half had paid. The rest had lost something. Someone had given up their last grain. Someone promised to work off the debt in the fields of Chue. 3 families gave their children into service. 3 children. Daniel stood at his door and looked out at the village. Min-soo approached. She stood beside him. She said that the Kim family had given away their eldest daughter, 13 years old. They took the girl away in a cart. Her mother ran after her until she collapsed. Daniel clenched his fists. His nails dug into his palms. He had paid his tax. He had saved his family. But 3 children had left on carts. A 13-year-old girl. He could have made more flatbreads. Could have earned more. Could have. Min-soo seemed to read his thoughts. She said he couldn't save everyone at once, that he had saved his family. That was enough. Daniel shook his head. He said no, it wasn't enough. Min-soo looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was crazy and went into the house. But there was no anger in her voice. There was confusion, like that of a person who suddenly discovered they were living next to someone they didn't know at all. That night, Daniel lay there staring at the dark ceiling. He remembered the face of the girl, Kim, on the cart. He hadn't seen it. He hadn't had time, but he imagined it. 5 years old, like Hannah. No, 13. But what difference did it make? A child on a cart. He closed his eyes. He opened the pantry door in his mind. Not to take anything, just to look. The shelves were fuller than yesterday. The market and the 140 flatbreads for strangers had replenished the supplies. The pantry fed on what he fed to others. The more he gave away, the more he received. So you're in debt. Feed them. He was in debt, and the 3 children on the carts were part of that debt, the unpaid part. He didn't fall asleep until dawn. The second month began with potatoes. Daniel had been thinking about this since day 1. Potatoes were the key to everything. In a world where rice yielded 1 harvest a year, and that harvest had failed for the 3rd season in a row, a crop was needed that grew quickly and yielded abundantly. Potatoes grew in 3 months. From 1 tuber, you could get 10. From 10, 100. From 100, 1,000. The math was simple, revolutionary, but dangerous. In the pantry, on the shelf with the seeds, lay a bag. The label was in English, seed potatoes. Daniel took 5 tubers, small ones, with sprouting eyes. He knew the theory. The recipe archive held more than just recipes. He remembered a documentary about the potato revolution in Europe. He remembered an article about how Frederick the Great forced Prussian peasants to plant potatoes. He remembered his grandmother's story about how Koreans grew kamja on mountain slopes. The theory was there. He had never put it into practice a single day in his life. He was a plot behind the hut. A slope, well drained, sun for half the day. He dug up the soil, broke up the clods, removed the stones. So Jiho's hands had grown stronger over the month, but still tired quickly. Every swing of the hoe reverberated through his shoulders. He cut the tubers into pieces, 2 or 3 eyes on each. Let them dry for a day. Dug furrows, a palm's depth, 2 paces between rows. He placed the pieces, covered them with soil, watered them, and waited. Minsu watched. She asked what he had planted. Daniel said it was kamja, a mountain root. It grows underground. It yields a lot. Minsu asked where he got the seeds. Daniel said from Uncle Manbok, through that same merchant. The legend about his uncle was falling apart at the seams. Too many things for a single shipment. Flour, meat, tools, now seeds. Minsu didn't argue, but her gaze was heavy. She was saving up questions. Sooner or later, they would overflow the cup and pour out all at once. Daniel knew this. He feared that day. But he couldn't change anything. Not yet, anyway. A week later, green shoots emerged from the ground, strong, hungry for light. Daniel fed them ash from the hearth. He watered them at dawn. He hilled them up when the stems grew to the height of his palm. Minsu helped, silently. She didn't believe in the mountain root, but she believed in work. Work is the only thing you can believe in when everything else deceives you. Alongside the potatoes, Daniel worked on the tavern. Not a real tavern, not yet. 100 for 4 in the front part of the cabin. A bench along the wall. The hearth had been expanded. Yuna's second frying pan hung on the wall. The idea was simple. Feed people in exchange for food. Not for money, for vegetables, for firewood, for work. Barter. Old Pei was the first to arrive. 80 years old, hunchbacked, with a cane. She'd seen Minsu at the market. Heard about the flatbreads, came to try some. Brought a bunch of green onions. All she had. Daniel sat her down at the table. Made rice porridge with egg and green onions. The porridge was simple, but the rice was clean. The egg was fresh. The green onions were sautéed until golden in a drop of sesame oil, a pinch of salt. Old Pa ate slowly, spoonful by spoonful. Then she lifted her head. Her eyes were wet. She said that's how her mother-in-law used to cook it, 50 years ago, when the land still yielded crops, when rice was rice and not just chaff. She finished eating, bowed, left. The next day she came with a friend. The friend brought a turnip. A week later, 3 or 4 people were sitting at the table every day. They paid with whatever they could. Onions, turnips, a handful of beans, a bundle of firewood. One man repaired Daniel's fence for a bowl of rice and meat. Another brought fish from the stream. Small, bony, but fish. Daniel fried it whole in a skillet, with garlic and salt, crispy on the outside, tender on the inside. The man who brought the fish sat down at the table and ate his own fish and didn't recognize it. He asked what kind of fish it was. Daniel said it was the very same one, the one you brought. The man didn't believe him. He tried another piece. He shook his head. He said it couldn't be. This one is delicious. Daniel didn't argue. He just smiled. The man left and returned the next day with 5 fish. Bigger ones. Fresher. He said that if So could turn them into what he'd had yesterday, he'd bring fish every day. That's how the first regular supplier appeared. Kim Tae-soon, a fisherman from the stream. Quiet, a man of few words, his hands scarred from fishing hooks. He brought the fish, Daniel cooked. Tae-soon ate and took a portion home to his wife. Barter, simple and honest. Yuna came to work on the 3rd day. Not at the market, at the eatery. She cleared tables, served bowls, chatted with the guests. And she was brilliant at it. She remembered everyone by name. She remembered who had eaten. She remembered what everyone liked. Old Pei likes her porridge runny. Blacksmith Pak likes it saltier. The fisherman's wife wants her rice separate from the fish. Yuna kept all of this in her head and never made a mistake. Daniel looked at her and saw a floor manager, a hostess, a manager, the person who makes a restaurant not just a place where people eat, but a place they return to. One evening after closing, Yuna was washing bowls by the well. Daniel came out to help. She was silent. Then she said that tomorrow was the anniversary. It had been a year since her husband had passed away. Daniel nodded. He waited. Yuna kept washing. Her hands moved mechanically. She said the last thing she remembered about her husband was his face at dinner. He was angry. She hadn't cooked the soup long enough. She was in a hurry. There wasn't enough firewood. The soup was undercooked. Her husband looked at her. He didn't say anything. He just looked and left. The next day, he went off to war. He didn't come back. And for a year now, she has been falling asleep with that look before her eyes, with that undercooked soup. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he asked what kind of soup it was. Yuna looked at him. She said it was doenjang jjigae, soybean paste, tofu, zucchini, green onions, a simple soup, an ordinary dinner, an ordinary last supper. Daniel nodded. He said nothing. Yuna went home. The next morning, the anniversary, Daniel got up before dawn. He opened the pantry. He took out miso paste, tofu, zucchini, green onions, dried anchovies for the broth. He cooked it slowly. The broth first, clear, rich, then the paste. He stirred it in with a spoon. He cut the tofu into cubes, the zucchini into thin half-moons, the green onions finely chopped. The soup simmered on low heat, thick, fragrant, warm. When Yuna came to the cabin, Daniel placed a bowl in front of her. One bowl. Nothing else on the table. Just the soup. Yuna looked at it. She leaned in. She sniffed and froze. Her face changed, as if someone had removed the mask she had been wearing for a year. Beneath the mask was the face of a 26-year-old woman who had lost her husband and hadn't had time to feed him. She picked up a spoon. She tasted it. She closed her eyes. She opened them. The spoon trembled in her hand. She ate, and tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't sob. She didn't sniffle. She just ate and cried. Quietly, like the rain outside the window. When the bowl was empty, Yuna sat motionless for a long time. Then she raised her head, looked at Daniel, said the soup was just right, just the way she'd wanted to make it that evening, just the way it was supposed to be. Daniel nodded. Yuna stood up, wiped her face with her sleeve, said she'd work for him every day. Daniel said he was glad. Yuna nodded and smiled. Through her tears, widely, unevenly, like someone who had remembered how to smile. She went to the well to wash the bowl. Minsu stood around the corner. Daniel didn't know how much she had seen. She came out, looked at him, said nothing. But that evening, as they lay on their mats in the dark, Minsu suddenly spoke up. She said that Yuna had been unwell all year, that she'd seen Yuna crying at night, that she'd tried to help but didn't know how, and that the soup was a good idea. She paused. Then she added that Daniel was a strange man, that normal men don't think about what kind of soup a stranger's widow needs. Daniel lay in the dark. He said he thinks about what kind of food every person needs, that it's all he knows how to do. Minsu was silent for a moment. Then she turned toward him, for the first time ever. Not toward the wall, toward him. She said she didn't understand him, but she wanted to understand. And she fell silent. Daniel lay there. He didn't move. Between them was the same half-meter of earthen floor, but that half-meter had grown shorter. By a millimeter. By a single millimeter. The third month brought Sora. Daniel found her by chance. He had gone into the woods behind the cabin to gather firewood. The forest was dense, coniferous. It smelled of resin and damp earth. He was walking along a path when he saw her in a clearing. A girl of about 24, not very tall, with slanted eyes that betrayed mixed blood. She was crouching in front of a bush, cutting leaves with a small knife. 12 pouches hung from her belt, each tied with a different string. She heard him before she saw him. She jumped up, knife forward, eyes wary, almost wild. Daniel stopped, raised his hands, said he'd come for firewood, not for her. The girl watched, didn't lower the knife. Daniel recognized the bush behind her, wild mint. He'd seen it in the Korean mountains in photographs. His grandmother had told him about it. Mountain mint with short stems and small leaves. A sharp, fresh aroma. An indispensable ingredient in cooking. He asked if that was mountain mint. The girl blinked. The knife dropped slightly. She said it was sukat, mountain wormwood, not mint. Daniel looked closer. She was right. The leaves were a different shape. The smell was different, bitter, grass-like. Sukat. He knew this herb. In Seattle, he used to add it to the dough for sunpyeong, rice cakes for Chuseok. His grandmother used to send dried sukat from Korea. He said that sukat was good in dough. The girl lowered her knife. She looked at him with a new expression. Not fear, not hostility, surprise. She said that no one in the village knew that sukat was edible. Everyone considered it a weed, or a witch's herb. Daniel sat down on a fallen tree. He said that many useful things are considered weeds until someone proves otherwise. The girl stood there. She thought. Then she sat down at a distance, far away. But she sat down. Her name was Ma Sora. Daniel knew this name from Jiho's memories, a half-breed. Her mother was from a steppe tribe. Her father was a local hunter. He died when she was 10. Her mother died 2 years ago. Sora lived alone in a hut on the edge of the forest. The villagers called her a witch, or a half-breed, or both at once. They didn't speak to her. They didn't invite her to the well. They didn't let her attend the communal festivals. She came to the village only to trade herbs for salt or flour. She took the bare minimum. She left quickly. 24 years of solitude in the body of a young woman who knew every bush in the forest and didn't know a single friend. Daniel asked what other herbs she gathered. Sora looked at him suspiciously, but she answered. She began cautiously. Wild garlic, mountain sorrel. Then faster. Burdock root, fern, wild sesame, perilla seeds, angelica, small mountain ginseng. The names poured out one after another. The 12 pouches on her belt began to make sense. Each one held a different herb, its own harvest time, its own storage. Daniel listened and saw not a herbalist before him. He saw a forager, a man who knows the territory like the back of his hand, every shelf, every drawer, every ingredient in its place. At his restaurant in Seattle, he'd worked with a forager, a guy named Marcus. He'd roam the forests of Washington state and bring back wild mushrooms, chanterelles, morels, chaga, fir shoots. Marcus charged $200 a basket, and it was the best $200 Daniel ever spent. Because a forager knows what a chef doesn't. He knows where things grow, when to harvest them, how to tell the edible from the poisonous. A chef turns a product into a dish. A forager turns the forest into a product. Daniel offered Sora a deal. She brings him herbs, he cooks dishes with them. They split the proceeds. Sora looked at him for a long time. Then she asked why he needed them. Daniel said he had a diner, a small one, a growing one. He needed ingredients that weren't available in the village. Herbs, roots, mushrooms, wild vegetables. Everything that grows in this forest, and that he doesn't know. Sora asked what he did know. Daniel smiled. He said he knew what to do with them once they were in his kitchen. Sora didn't smile back, but she nodded. She said she'd bring them tomorrow. She'd take a look. And she went into the forest, quickly, silently, like a shadow between the trees. The next morning, a bundle of herbs lay at the cabin's threshold, tied with rough rope. Wild garlic, young fern shoots, and a note. Not a note, a stone on which a single word had a single word scratched into it. Show me. Daniel took the herbs. He rinsed them, laid them out on a board, sniffed each one. Sukat is slightly bitter. Wild garlic is pungent. The fern is delicate with a nutty flavor. He closed his eyes. He leafed through the archives. Sukat goes into dough and tea. Wild garlic replaces the regular kind, but gives a deeper aroma. Fern is stir-fried with sesame and soy sauce, a dish known in Korea as gosari namul. He began to cook. He rinsed the fern, soaked it in cold water, boiled it until tender, drained it. A drop of sesame oil in the pan. Wild garlic, finely chopped. Fern, a spoonful of soy sauce, a pinch of sesame seeds. He fried it quickly, 2 minutes. The fern glistened. It smelled of sesame and earth and something ancient and right. He made dough from the sukat, flour, water, finely chopped sukat. He kneaded it. The dough turned green, herbal, alive. He rolled out small flatbreads. He fried them. Green flatbreads with a slightly bitter, grassy aftertaste. Unusual, interesting, delicious. Sora arrived for dinner. Daniel sat her down at the table. He placed 3 bowls in front of her. Gosari namul, green breads, and plain rice. Sora looked at the bowls, then at Daniel. Her face was unreadable. She picked up her chopsticks, tried the fern, chewed it. Her eyes widened slightly. Tried the bread, turned it over in her hands, took a bite, chewed slowly, put down her chopsticks. Said that these were her herbs. Daniel nodded. He said that was exactly right. Her herbs, her taste. It wouldn't have worked without her. Sora sat quietly. Then she said that no one ever had. She paused, started over. She said that no one in her entire life had ever treated her knowledge as something valuable. A rag, a witch, a half-breed. That's all she'd ever heard. And here was a man taking her herbs and turning them into food that smelled so good it made you want to close your eyes. Daniel was silent. He waited. Sora stood up. She said she'd come back tomorrow, with mushrooms, and she left. She didn't look back, but her back was different, a little straighter, a little more confident. She came every day. At first, she left the herbs at the doorstep and left. Then she started coming in, sitting in the corner, watching Daniel cook. Then she began to offer advice. This root needs to be soaked for 2 days, otherwise it will be bitter. These mushrooms should be dried in the sun, not in the shade. Then the flavor will be stronger. This herb should be picked only in the morning, before the dew has dried. Daniel listened. He memorized it. Every piece of advice became a new entry in his archive, local knowledge found in no cookbook in the world. 2 weeks later, Sora was sitting at the communal table, next to Yuna, next to Minsu, eating from the same bowl. Yuna chatted with her like an old friend. Minsu poured her tea. Hana showed off her mud pies. Sora watched all this and didn't understand. She didn't understand how it had come to this, that she was sitting at the table with people and no one was giving her dirty looks. No one was whispering. No one was leaving when she sits down. Daniel saw it, saw how her shoulders slowly dropped, how her fingers stopped clenching the chopsticks until her knuckles turned white, how her breathing evened out. This is what a person looks like who has been let into a house after 24 years in the cold. One morning, Daniel found not just a bunch of herbs at the doorstep, a whole basket, 20 varieties, each wrapped separately, each labeled, in charcoal on a sheet of paper, in crooked letters. Sora wasn't good at writing, but she labeled every herb. The name, the harvest time, the properties, a little forager's guide compiled at night by the light of a torch. For him. Daniel held the basket and looked at the crooked letters, and the pantry door inside gave a quiet shudder, as if someone behind it had grunted approvingly. The shelves were starting to look a little fuller. The fourth month, the tavern had grown. The table for 4 had turned into 2 tables for 8. Daniel had expanded the front of the hut. He'd added a canopy, dug in posts, stretched a cloth over them to keep out the rain. Now he could serve food outside as well. People came every day, not just from Tebet Gol. People began coming from neighboring villages. A farmer from Solmi walked 2 hours because his godfather had told him about the flatbread with honey. A salt merchant turned off the road because he caught the scent of fried fish. 3 women from Chani came together. They said they wanted to try the soup everyone in the county was talking about. Daniel fed them all. Bartering expanded. People now paid for food with more than just vegetables and firewood. One brought fabric. Another brought a clay pot. A third promised 2 days of work on Daniel's plot. A small-scale economy sprang up around the eatery like mushrooms after rain. Minsu managed everything. It happened imperceptibly. She didn't ask for authority. She simply began to decide. Who gets how much? Who brought what? How much the work is worth? How much the cloth cost? She calculated in her head faster than Daniel could write it down with charcoal on the board. She had a perfect memory for numbers. Who owed what? Who was owed what? How much flour was left? How much firewood for the evening? Daniel looked at her and thought that, in another world, she would be running a corporation. Or an army. Or both. Yuna ran the hall. She chatted with the guests. She laughed. Her laughter was loud and infectious, and people came partly for that laughter. In a village where everyone walked around looking older than their years, a young widow who knew how to laugh was like a breath of fresh air. Sora brought herbs and mushrooms. Every morning, a basket at the doorstep. Every day, a new ingredient. Daniel incorporated her finds into the menu. Mountain mushroom soup, wild garlic salad, rice with ferns, green flatbreads with suakat. He announced aloud every dish that contained Sora's herbs. This is Sora's recipe. She found these mushrooms. She knows where the best herbs are. Sora sat in the corner and blushed, but her back grew straighter with each passing day. The potatoes were growing. The green bushes on the plot behind the hut had grown knee-high, sturdy, healthy, dark leaves, not a single yellow spot. Daniel hilled them up every week, watered them, kept an eye out for bugs. The villagers walked by and shook their heads. Strange bushes. Why plant something that doesn't sprout ears? Where's the grain? Where's the rice? What kind of weed is this? Minsu shook her head along with them. But she kept helping, because Daniel had never once let her down. Not once in 4 months. Hana helped too, in her own way. She decided the potato plants were her charges. Every morning she walked around the rows, counted the plants, checked the leaves. If she found a bug, she'd pick it off with her fingers and carry it far away. Serious, meticulous. A little agronomist in a dirty dress. Junho. The boy changed more slowly than anyone else. He didn't talk to Daniel. He didn't approach him. He didn't sit next to him. But he stopped running away when Daniel entered the room. He stopped hiding food. He stopped turning away at the table. Small shifts. Tectonic in scale. One evening, Daniel was preparing dough for the morning flatbreads, his hands covered in flour. Junho sat by the wall and watched, silently, as always. Daniel kneaded, rhythmic movements, Press down, turn, fold. Press down, turn, fold. 10 minutes later, Junho stood up. He walked over, not to Daniel, to the table. He reached out toward the dough, touched it. His fingers sank into the soft mass. The boy froze. He looked at his fingers. He looked at the dough. He looked at Daniel. Daniel didn't stop. He kept kneading. In his usual voice, he said that if he wanted to, he could try. He demonstrated the motion. Press down with the heel of your palm. Fold the dough. Fold it in half. Press down again. Junho watched. Then he placed both hands on the dough and began to knead. Clumsily, too hard. The dough was spreading out. Daniel corrected him, gently. Don't press down. Feel it. The dough is alive. It'll tell you when it's enough. Junho tried again. Better. One more time. Even better. For 5 minutes, they kneaded in silence, side by side. 4 hands in the flour, big and small. Junho didn't say a word, but he didn't leave. When the dough was ready, he stepped back, wiped his hands on his pants. He looked at Daniel and went to his sleeping mat. Minsu saw everything from behind the wall. Daniel knew she had seen. He heard her hold her breath when Junho touched the dough. He heard her exhale when he started kneading. That night she lay facing him, not the wall, for the second time. She didn't say anything. She just lay there, breathing evenly. The 5th month, potatoes. Daniel checked on them every day. The tops had turned yellow. Time. He chose a morning after the rain when the soil was soft. He went to the plot, crouched down, pulled on a bush. The stem gave way easily. Tubers emerged from the ground, pale, round, fist-sized. 5 tubers from one bush. He raked the soil with his hands. 3 more. 8 tubers from one bush, from a single planted clump. From 5 bushes, he gathered 37 tubers. 37 potatoes. Heavy, solid, smelling of earth and possibility. He laid them out on a board. Minsu stood nearby, watching. Hana crouched down and touched one tuber. She said it felt like a rock. Daniel said that inside it wasn't a rock at all. Minsu picked up a potato, turned it over. She asked what to do with it. Daniel said he'd show her now. He took 5 tubers. He set the rest aside for seeds, for the next planting. 32 tubers. Each would yield 8 more. 256 by the end of the next season. Thousands by next year. The math was simple, revolutionary. He peeled the potatoes, sliced them, put them in a pan, oil, finely chopped garlic, a pinch of salt. He fried them over medium heat. The slices sizzled. They turned golden. The edges became crispy. The center remained soft. The aroma rose, a new aroma. Nothing like this had ever existed in this village. Not in this village. Not in this world. Fried potatoes with garlic. The simplest thing you can do with potatoes. And the most compelling. He divided them into bowls. 5 bowls. For himself, Minsu, Jungho, Hane, and one for Yuna, who had just walked in. Hane tasted it first, as always. She took a slice, blowed on it, took a bite, chewed. Her face changed. She chewed and swallowed and looked at the slice in her hand and looked at Daniel. She said it wasn't a rock. Daniel said no, not a rock. Hana said it tasted better than hotteok. Yuna choked. Minsu raised an eyebrow. Hotteok was their pride and joy, their livelihood, their first victory. And now a 5-year-old child ranked fried potatoes higher. Daniel laughed. For the first time in his life. A real laugh, from the gut. Minsu looked at him, and something in her face twitched. Not a smile, but something close to a smile. Something was alive. The 6th month. Manager Cho came again. Not for taxes. The taxes had been paid. He came to inquire, a word that, on the lips of a bureaucrat, Sounds like a knife scraping against a plate. To inquire. He arrived on horseback, one servant with him. He dismounted at the gate of the tavern. Now it was a gate, wooden. Daniel had carved 3 characters above it. The So hearth. The manager stood and looked. At the gate, at the awning, at the tables where 4 peasants from Chani sat eating mushroom soup. At Yoon, who was carrying bowls. At Minsu, who was counting something on a wooden board. At Daniel himself, who was standing by the hearth, frying fish. The manager's name was Kwan. Either he didn't have a last name or it didn't matter. Just Kwan. The manager's eyes, right, left, round, both scanned the room like 2 thieves searching a room for valuables. He was counting. Daniel saw it. Counting portions, counting guests, counting the turnover, estimating how much was bypassing Mr. Cho's cash register. Kwan approached the counter. Said he'd heard about Master So's establishment. Said Mr. Cho was interested. New businesses in his district had to be registered. Sales tax, 1/10 of the income. Daniel stood with a spatula in his hand. The fish sizzled in the pan. He looked at Kwan, calmly. He said this wasn't trade. It was barter. Neighbors brought what they had and received food. He didn't take money. No money, no income. No income, no tax. Kwan smiled, a thin smile that had nothing to do with cheerfulness. He said that barter also has value. Fabric has value. Firewood has value. Labor has value. Mr. Cho is interested in all the value that passes through his county. Daniel didn't look away. He said that Mr. Cho had already received his tax, 5 nyan, on time. Kwan said that tax was a land tax. This one is a trade tax. Different taxes, different amounts, different consequences if you don't pay. Pause. The fish in the pan began to burn. Daniel flipped it over. A perfect move. A golden crust. He looked up at Kwan. He said he understood. He asked how much. Kwan named the amount, 2 nyan of silver. Every month. That was more than Daniel earned in 2 days at the market. It was robbery, legalized, official, with a seal. But robbery. Daniel nodded. He said he'd think about it. Kwan said he needed to think quickly. A week. Then they would come, not with questions, but with answers. He turned around, mounted his horse, rode away. Minsu stood by the wall, white. Her fingers clenched the abacus. Yuna froze with bowls in her hands. Sora, who had just brought the morning basket of herbs, stood in the doorway and watched the riders retreat. The 4 guests at the table fell silent. Everyone heard. Everyone understood. That evening, Daniel sat by the hearth. Minsu, Yuna, Sora, all 3 across from him. The first war council. Minsu spoke, quietly, clearly. 2 nannies a month is impossible. Right now, the tavern earns at most 4 or 5 nannies a month, if you barter at market value. Give 2 of them to Cho. That leaves 2 or 3 for living expenses. For 6 people. For food, for firewood, for repairs. Barely enough. Yuna said we could earn more. More flatbreads for the market. More frequent trips to the market. New dishes. Raise prices. Sora was silent. Then she said one thing. That if we don't pay, they'll come and take everything. Not the flatbreads, not the bowls. The house, the land, the children. Silence. Daniel stared at the fire. He thought. Kwan was a pawn. Behind him stood Cho Dokwan. 3 counties, 8 children, 3 wives, debts to the court. Cho isn't evil. Cho is pragmatic. He sees a new source of income and wants his share. If Daniel pays, Cho will raise the stakes. In a month, 3 nannies. In 2 months, 4. Until he squeezes everything out. If he doesn't pay, Cho will break him. Slowly, methodically, without malice. Like tearing down a wall that blocks the road. A third way is needed. Neither pay nor rebel. Become useful. So useful that breaking him would cost more than putting up with him. Daniel raised his head. He looked at Minsu. He said he would pay, but not 2 nannies. 1. And not with silver, with food. Minsu raised an eyebrow. Daniel explained. Choi Dok-won is a rich man. A rich man has silver. A rich man doesn't have good food. In this world where even nobles eat bland porridge with dried meat, real flavor is worth more than silver. He'll offer to supply Choi with food, once a week, the best he can prepare, for the master's table, for his wives, for his guests, in exchange for patronage, not money, a favor, to make Choi a client, the best client, a dependent client. Minsu listened. Her expression didn't change. Then she said it was either genius or suicidal. Yuna said it was more likely the latter. Sora said nothing, but her eyes were pensive. Daniel nodded. He said he would go to the Cho estate tomorrow morning, alone. Minsu said no, not alone. She would go with him. Daniel looked at her. Minsu said someone had to keep track, and someone had to make sure he didn't say anything he shouldn't. Their first joint operation. In the morning, they set out before dawn. The Cho estate was a 2-hour walk away, large, a stone wall, a tiled roof, a garden, a pond, everything the village had only ever seen in its dreams. A guard at the gate. Daniel identified himself. He asked for an audience with the steward, Kwan. The guard left. He returned. He let them in. Kwan received them in the inner courtyard. A table, 2 chairs, tea, watery, bland. Daniel took a sip, set it down. Kwan asked if he had brought the money. Daniel said he had brought something better. He took a bundle out of the basket, unwrapped it. 3 hotok, fresh, still warm, fried an hour ago in special oil with cinnamon, filled with honey and crushed sesame seeds. The best flatbreads he'd ever made. Not market style, homemade. Kwan looked at them, sniffed them, took one, took a bite, chewed. And on his face, that face Daniel had only ever seen in 2 states, cold and even colder, a 3rd state appeared. Confusion. Kwan finished the flatbread. He took a 2nd one, ate it, took a 3rd, stopped, put it back, as if he'd forced himself. He looked at Daniel, said it wasn't worth 2 nien of silver. Daniel agreed, said it was worth more. He explained the offer. Food for Chedok-wan's table, the best food in the 3 counties, a new dish every week, for the master personally, for his wives, for his guests when they visit. Daniel doesn't just feed them. He makes Che's table the best table in the entire district. Reputation, influence. When an official from the capital visits Che and tastes such food, he doesn't remember the official. He remembers the table. Food is a power that everyone underestimates. Kwan listened. His face grew cold again, but his eyes were thinking. He said he would pass it on to the master. He asked to save the 3rd pancake. For Mr. Cho, a personal sample. Daniel left it. They left. On the way back, Minsu was silent for half the journey. Then she said that the 3rd pancake was a trap. Daniel nodded. Of course it was a trap. He'd prepared it on purpose. A little more honey, a little more cinnamon, a little more sesame. A taste you remember. One you want to repeat. After which ordinary food tastes like cardboard. 1 flatbread. The 1st dose. Free. Like in his world, the 1st cup of coffee handed out by promoters at a new cafe. Try it. Get hooked. Come back for more. Minsu shook her head. She said he was a dangerous man. Daniel looked at her. She wasn't smiling, but the corners of her lips were soft, not tight, soft. 3 days later, a reply arrived. Not from Kwan, from Cho Dok-won himself. A letter, on fine paper, beautiful handwriting. Mr. Cho accepts the offer. Food for his table once a week. In exchange, the So family is exempt from sales tax and property tax for 1 year, with the possibility of renewal. Minsu read the letter 3 times. Then she put it down. Then she read it a 4th time. She looked at Daniel. Her eyes were shining. She said he had won. Daniel shook his head. He said he hadn't won. He had just bought some time. Cho wants to try it out. If he likes it, he'll want more. If he wants more, he'll become dependent. And a dependent person doesn't break what they depend on. Minsu nodded, then suddenly reached out her hand, placed her palm on his hand. For a single second, firmly, like someone clinging to the edge of a boat in a storm, and pulled it away. She stood up. She walked over to the children. His hand was burning. His skin remembered. 1 second, one touch, the first in 4 months. Voluntary, not accidental. Daniel sat and breathed. The war with Cho was not over. It was just beginning. But he had won the first round. And standing next to him was a woman who could calculate better than any bureaucrat. And, for the first time in 6 years, had touched his hand of her own free will. The 7th month. Winter was creeping up on the valley like a thief. Not all at once. First, morning frost on the grass. Then a cold wind from the north. Then the first snow. Light, like powder. It melted by noon. But everyone understood. Winter was coming, and it would be harsh. Daniel was preparing. The second crop of potatoes yielded over 200 tubers. He set aside 100 for seed. He stored the rest in the cellar. He had dug the cellar behind the hut in October, a pit as tall as a man, the walls lined with stone, a wooden lid covered with earth. Inside, it was cold and dry. The potatoes lay in rows on straw. Next to them were sacks of rice, local rice, dried and sorted grain by grain. Turnips, radishes, beans. Dried mushrooms hung in bunches from the ceiling. Tesson's dried fish. Jars of sauerkraut. Daniel made kimchi. Real kimchi. Without chili peppers, which didn't exist in this world, but with mustard, with ginger, with garlic, with fish sauce from the pantry. He fermented 3 large pots. Minsu helped. She kneaded the cabbage with her hands, pressing salt and spices into every leaf. The work was hard, monotonous, but Minsu didn't complain. She never complained at all. She just did it, silently, with her back straight. Daniel watched her hands in the brine and thought there was no sight more beautiful in the world. The Ochogso eatery was open every day, 10 to 12 guests for lunch, 5 or 6 for dinner. Yuna greeted and saw them off. Sora brought in the last autumn herbs. She prepared them for drying over the winter. She hung the bundles under the awning. The scent was tart and warm, like a pharmacy and a kitchen at the same time. Minsu managed everything. She kept records. She counted. She got a notebook, a real one, made of paper that Daniel traded for at the market for 5 servings of hot tak. Minsu wrote in it every evening. Who came? What they brought, what they ate, how much was left, how much was needed, the bookkeeping of a small empire. Supplies for Choe arrived once a week. Every Monday, Daniel cooked, not just food, a masterpiece. One week, roast duck with honey and mountain herbs. A hunter from Solm brought the duck in exchange for 20 hot tak. The next week, rice dumplings stuffed with sweet potatoes, baked in a clay pot with a crust. The third week, soup made from 5 kinds of mushrooms. The broth simmered for 6 hours, clear, golden. 1 spoonful, and a person would forget why they'd come. Kwan took the food in silence, but with each passing week, his face would change at the sight of the basket. The icy mask would crack, just a little bit, around the eyes. Somewhere around the 6th week, he said thank you for the first time, quietly. Almost inaudibly, as if the word were physically difficult for him to say. Daniel nodded. He didn't press the issue. People open up when you're not staring at them. Once, Kwan lingered. Usually, he'd take the basket and leave. That day, he stayed. He stood by the gate. He hesitated. Then he said his wife was sick. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. Nothing would go down. Daniel asked what was wrong with her. Kwan said she had a fever. The herbalist had given her a decoction. The fever had broken, but she couldn't eat. Even rice water came right back up. Daniel nodded. He went to the kitchen. An hour later, he returned with a small pot. Inside was a beetle, rice porridge in bone broth, cooked down to a creamy consistency, with ginger to relieve nausea, with honey for strength, with a drop of sesame oil for flavor. Porridge for the sick. He used to make this in Seattle when his friends had the flu. Simple, delicate, warm. Food that requires no effort from the body. It just goes in and does its job. Quan took the pot. He looked at Daniel. Something flashed in his eyes. Quickly, like a fish under water. And it was gone. He nodded. He left. 3 days later, a letter arrived from Cho. Not a demand, not an order. An invitation. Mr. Cho Dok-won invites Master So Jiho to dinner at the estate. In person. Minsu read the letter. She turned pale. She said it was a trap, or a test, or both. Daniel said it was an opportunity. Minsu said that opportunities and traps often look the same. Daniel agreed. He said he would go. Minsu said she would too. Daniel said the invitation was for one person. Minsu said she would wait outside the gates, all night if necessary. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were firm. It wasn't a discussion. It was a statement. The Cho estate looked different in the evening. Lanterns along the path, warm light from the windows, the garden in the evening shadows. Beautiful. If you didn't think about how many impoverished villages feed this beauty. Daniel was led into the dining room. A low table, cushions on the floor, candles. And sitting at the table was Cho Dok-won. Daniel saw him for the first time. Jiho's memory had preserved the image. Large, formidable, a face of stone. Reality was different. Cho Dok-won was short, thin, with slender fingers and intelligent eyes. A tired face, wrinkles around his mouth, gray hair at his temples. 45 years old, but he looked 60. A man who carries a burden and doesn't show it. Cho looked at Daniel for a long time, silently. Then he said he wanted to meet the man whose food had made his manager say thank you. Quan hadn't said thank you in 20 years. Daniel sat down across from him. He said that food is an honest language. It doesn't know how to lie. If it's delicious, it means it's made with soul. If it's soulless, no amount of spices will save it. Cho smiled. The first sign of life on that stony face. He said Daniel spoke beautifully for a peasant. Daniel didn't look away. He said he was a cook, not a peasant. Cho raised an eyebrow. A cook. Interesting. The servants served dinner. Daniel looked at the dishes. Rice, boiled meat, salted fish, pickled vegetables. The soup was cloudy and bland. A standard table in a well-to-do household. Solid, filling, boring. Cho ate mechanically, like a man who had long since stopped noticing what he was eating. Between courses, he asked questions. Where did he learn to cook? Where did the strange vegetables come from? Where did the new recipes come from? Daniel answered cautiously. Family tradition. His grandmother taught him. His grandfather's recipes. A traveling relative brought back seeds. Half-truths hidden in legends. Cho listened. He nodded. He didn't believe a word of it. Daniel could see that. He could see how those intelligent eyes sifted through every phrase. Cho wasn't a fool. He was a merchant. A merchant hears a lie just as a musician hears a false note. Then Cho fell silent. He set down his chopsticks, he looked away, and said he missed his nanny's rice cakes. An old woman. She died 15 years ago. She made rice cakes with red beans, small, round, with thin dough and a sweet filling. He ate them every day after school. He would sit on the porch, eat the cakes, and the world was simple. Then the wet nurse died, and the cakes ran out, and the world ceased to be simple. Cho spoke all this in an even voice, without emotion, as if reading a shopping list. But his fingers on the table trembled slightly. Daniel listened. He memorized every word, every detail. Rice pies, red beans, small, round, Thin dough, sweet filling. After school, on the porch. He nodded, said he was grateful for dinner. Cho nodded back. The audience was over. Minsu was waiting at the gate, standing in the dark, hands tucked into her sleeves, face pale from the cold. She had been waiting for 3 hours. Daniel approached. She asked how it went. He said it went well. She asked what he wanted. Daniel said he needed red beans. Daniel found red beans at the market, dried ones, small ones, dark burgundy. He bought them for 1/4 of a nana, a lot, 3 measures. Soaked them overnight, cooked them in the morning, slowly. 4 hours on low heat. The beans turned into a paste. He added honey, a little, a pinch of salt. Stirred it, tasted it. Sweet, earthy, thick. Now for the dough, rice flour. There was a bag in the pantry, fine, snow white. He took exactly as much as he needed. Kneaded it with hot water. The dough turned out elastic, warm, obedient. He rolled out small circles, thin, almost transparent. He placed a spoonful of bean paste in the center of each one, pinched the edges. Round, small, the size of 2 fingers. Perfect little moons. He made 20 of them, steamed, not fried, not boiled, steamed. There was a bamboo steamer in the pantry. He took it out when no one was looking. He placed it over a pot of boiling water. He laid the dumplings on a damp cloth. He closed the lid. 15 minutes. Steam rose. It smelled sweet, like rice, like childhood. When he lifted the lid, the dumplings were ready, white, soft, with a filling that was just slightly visible. He took one, broke it open, thin dough, inside a dark, sweet paste. Hot. He took a bite, closed his eyes. His grandmother's taste. Not his grandmother's, but someone's. A taste that smelled of the porch and the afternoon sun and a time when the world was simple. He placed the pastries in a basket, covered them with a cloth, carried them to the estate himself. He didn't wait for Kwan. He came to the gate, asked to have them delivered, personally, to Mr. Che, not to the manager. The guard listened. He returned. He let him through. Che Dok-wan was sitting in his office, papers on the table, bills, letters, seals. His face was tired, gray. He looked up. He saw Daniel. He saw the basket. Daniel set the basket on the table. He removed the cloth. 20 pastries lay in neat rows, white, round, small. Steam was still rising. Choi looked at them. He didn't move. His face didn't change. Then he reached out, took one pastry, brought it to his face, sniffed it, and his hand trembled. He took a bite, chewed slowly. His eyes closed. His jaw moved. He swallowed, opened his eyes. They were wet. Che Dok-wan, Lord of 3 counties, a man who could sell an entire village into slavery with a single word. He sat at his table with wet eyes, holding a rice cake with red beans in his hand. He didn't wipe away his tears. He didn't look away. He sat and ate, one rice cake after another, silently. He stopped at the 4th one, put it on the table, looked at Daniel, asked how he knew. Daniel said the master had told him himself, at dinner. The wet nurse's rice cakes, red beans, small, round. Choi shook his head, said that wasn't it, asked how Daniel knew the taste. Because the taste was exactly that, not similar, the very same. As if old Aqua had risen from the grave and baked them again. Daniel said nothing. He couldn't explain. He couldn't say that the recipe archive was a photographic memory that recreated a dish from a description. That 20 years in the kitchen teach you to listen when someone talks about food. To hear not the words, but the taste behind the words. Small means one bite. Round means shaped in the palms. Thin dough meant rice flour mixed with hot water. A sweet red bean filling meant long simmering and a little honey. After school on the porch meant warm from the steamer. All of this came together in a recipe, precise, the only one possible. Cho sat in silence. Then he put the remaining dumplings in a basket. He called his servant. He ordered him to take them to the wives. Then he turned to Daniel. His face had turned to stone again, but not like before. A cracked stone. Something alive was showing through the crack. Cho said he had a proposal, not an order. A proposal. Daniel listened. Choi said that in a month, an inspector from the capital would arrive to audit tax collections. If the inspector found violations, and there were violations because Choi had been underreporting to the court for years, then Choi would lose everything. The estate, the counties, his family, possibly his head as well. The only way to win over the inspector was to make an impression, to show that the county was thriving, that the people were well off, that taxes were collected honestly and with a profit. To show it through the table, through food that the inspector will remember and take with him the memory that life in Choi's county is good. Choi suggested that Daniel prepare a banquet for the inspector, 20 dishes, the best he could do. In return, Choi wasn't offering patronage, not tax exemption, a partnership, a full-fledged one, a commercial one. Choi would invest money in expanding the eatery, building a proper kitchen, a mill, a bakery. Daniel would manage it. Profits split 50-50. Daniel listened. He did the math. A mill, a bakery, a proper kitchen, everything he'd been thinking about, everything he'd planned for the year ahead, offered right now in exchange for one banquet, one evening, 20 courses. He said yes. Cho nodded. He held out his hand. Daniel shook it. Cho's hand was dry and cold. His grip was firm, the hand of a man accustomed to holding on to what he takes. Daniel left the estate. Minsu was waiting, not at the gate, halfway to the house. She was walking toward him. She couldn't stand waiting. Daniel told her everything, the banquet, the alliance, the mill, the bakery. Minsu listened. Her face changed. Disbelief, calculation, fear, hope, all at once. She asked if he could be trusted. Cho. Daniel said no, but his greed could be trusted. Cho sees profit. As long as Daniel brings in profit, Cho will protect him. Not out of kindness, out of calculation. Minsu nodded. Then she said that 20 dishes in one evening was madness. Daniel said that in Seattle, he used to make 120 per shift. Minsu looked at him. He realized he'd said too much. Seattle. A word that shouldn't be here. Minsu asked what Seattle was. Daniel paused. He said that was the name of the place where his grandmother ran a kitchen. Far from here. Very far. Minsu looked at him for a long time. Then she said that someday he would tell her the truth. Not today, but someday. Daniel said he would. Minsu nodded, and they walked home, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. For the first time ever, their hands accidentally brushed as they walked. Neither pulled away. Preparing for the banquet took 3 weeks. Daniel worked like he'd never worked before, not in any lifetime. 20 dishes. Each had to be perfect. Each had to tell a story. He put together the menu. He pored over the recipe archive at night. He chose, he discarded. He chose again. The menu had to be local. No suspicious ingredients. No words that don't exist in this world. But the techniques were out of this world. And that was his strength. Local ingredients prepared with a mastery that didn't exist here. Rice prepared 5 different ways. Boiled, fried, steamed, simmered in broth. And rice chips. Thinly rolled rice, dried and fried in oil until crisp. Fish prepared 4 ways. Fried, steamed, marinated in vinegar with ginger, and fish patties, meat minced by hand, shaped and fried. They didn't do it that way here. Here, they chopped the meat into chunks and boiled it until it turned gray. Daniel knew 30 ways to prepare fish and was going to show the 4 best. Meat. Pork from the pantry. He understood it was a risk, a big one. Pork of a quality that didn't exist in this world. But the banquet demanded sacrifices. He marinated the meat in soy sauce with honey and ginger for 2 days. Then he simmered it in a clay pot over coals for 6 hours. The meat fell apart at a glance. It melted on the tongue. The broth turned dark and thick as molten gold. Vegetables. Potatoes. For the first time. For someone else's table. Daniel made up his mind. He sliced them thinly, fried them until crisp, sprinkled them with salt and Sora's mountain herbs, served them as an appetizer. The inspector won't know what it is. He'll ask, and Daniel will say it's the mountain root kumja, grown by himself. A new crop, promising. Let the inspector take back to the capital not only the memory of the taste, but also word of the new vegetable. Mushroom soup. 5 kinds of mushrooms. A broth made from bones and dried anchovies. 8 hours of simmering. Clear, luminous, with the scent of the forest. 1 spoonful and you're standing among the pines after the rain. Kimchi. 3 kinds. Cabbage, radish, cucumber. Each made to a special recipe. Fermented for 2 weeks to a month. Sour, spicy, fresh, alive. Bread. Real yeast bread, soft on the inside, with a crispy crust. Bread like this didn't exist in this world. The inspector won't know what it is. Daniel will call it steamed flatbread from a closed oven. Sounds local. Looks impossible. Sweet. Rice cakes with red beans, the very ones. That made Chedokwan cry. Hotok with honey. Baked apples with cinnamon. Small, sour local ones. But baked with honey and cinnamon, they turned into a dessert fit for a royal table. 20 dishes, each one perfected, each one tasted, each one refined. Minsu tried everything. She became his chief critic. Ruthless, honest. This rice is too salty. This fish is a bit dry. This soup could be thicker. Daniel listened and made adjustments. No hard feelings. No arguments. A chef who doesn't listen to criticism is a chef who will soon be out of a restaurant. Yuna was in charge of plating. Daniel explained to her how to arrange the dishes. Order, spacing, color balance, dark next to light, hot separate from cold. Yuna listened with her mouth agape. Then she said it was like creating a floral arrangement using only food. Daniel said that was exactly right. Food is an art that enters through the eyes before it enters the mouth. Sora provided the herbs and garnishes, sprigs of mountain mint, perilla leaves, chrysanthemum blossoms. Edible, beautiful. A small touch of green on every dish, like an artist's signature. Airy. She appeared a week before the banquet, not part of the plan, out of the snow, literally. In the morning, Minsu opened the door and found a bundle lying on the threshold. Not a bundle, a person, a girl, about 17, skinny to the point of transparency, blue lips, eyes closed. Minsu dragged her inside. Daniel wrapped her in a blanket. Yuna heated water. Sora looked for herbs to treat frostbite. The girl woke up 2 hours later, shivering, her teeth chattering. Daniel gave her broth, hot, beef, with ginger. She drank with both hands, greedily, burning her mouth, without stopping. She drank the whole bowl. She looked up. Her eyes were huge, dark, frightened. She said her name was Kim Airy, that she was from a village beyond the pass, that the village was no more. It had burned down. Bandits, deserters from the northern border. She was the only survivor. She'd been walking for 3 days, without food, without warm clothes. She collapsed at the first threshold she saw. Minsu looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Minsu. A wordless conversation. A second. Minsu nodded. Daniel turned to Airy. He said she would stay, as long as necessary. Eri looked at him. She didn't believe him. She expected a catch. She expected a price. In a world where kindness always comes at a price, the orphan girl knew that nothing was free. Daniel said there was a price. Once she was back on her feet, she would help out in the kitchen. Eri nodded, quickly, too quickly, like someone who was used to being loved only as long as she was useful. Daniel noticed it. He remembered it. 4 days later, Eri was standing in the kitchen, still weak, but standing. Daniel showed her how to cut vegetables, knife in the right hand, left hand steadying it, fingers curled. The tip of the knife never leaves the board, moving away from you, smooth, rhythmic. Eri took the knife. Her first movements were uncertain. By the 10th, more confident. By the 20th, smooth. By the 50th, fast. Daniel stopped her. He said she had the knack. Eri didn't understand. He explained. There are people with the knack and people without it. Not physically, in terms of feel. Some pick up a knife and struggle their whole lives. Others pick up a knife and an hour later are cutting as if they were born with it. Eri had the knack, a golden one, quick, precise. A week before the banquet, she was cutting vegetables faster than Daniel. He wasn't exaggerating. Under her knife, carrots turned into thin, uniform slices, as if from a printing press. Radishes into perfect little cubes. Onions into translucent half rings. Daniel watched and saw a student. A real one. His first. The day of the banquet. Snow had been falling since morning, and by evening had settled in a thick layer. The Cho estate glowed with lanterns. The inspector arrived in the afternoon. Yoon Hae-jin. Not him, her. A young woman in men's clothing. 31 years old. A face like a porcelain mask. Cold eyes. Daniel caught a glimpse of her in the courtyard. She walked without looking back. Back straight. Stride precise. A person accustomed to danger. The estate's kitchen had been at his disposal since noon. He brought the team. Minsu, Yuna, Sora, Eri. 5 people, 20 dishes, 6 hours. They worked in silence, like a machine. Daniel at the main station. Meat, fish, hot dishes. Eri chopped vegetables and served them. Sora prepared broths and stocks. Yuna handled the plating. Minsu oversaw everything. Timing, order, temperature, when to serve, what comes next. She stood at the entrance to the dining room with a wooden clipboard and commanded like a general. The first course went out to the dining room at 7 o'clock in the evening. Rice chips with a soybean paste and honey sauce. Light, crispy, unexpected. Second course, mushroom soup, clear, golden, with a sprig of mountain mint. Third course, steamed fish on a bed of sora herbs. Fourth course, 3 kinds of kimchi. Then the dishes came one after another, like waves, each one more complex, brighter, deeper. The potato chips caused a pause. Daniel could hear it through the wall. Silence at the table. Then Che's voice explaining that this was a new crop, a mountain root, grown by a local master. Meat in a clay pot. Daniel served it himself, placed it on the table, removed the lid. Steam rose. The aroma filled the room. Honey, ginger, 6 hours of simmering. The meat was dark and glossy. He saw the inspector's face, Yoon Hae-jin, a porcelain mask, motionless. She picked up her chopsticks, cut off a piece, put it in her mouth, chewed. And the mask, the porcelain mask that this woman had likely worn her entire life, flinched for a single second. Daniel saw it. Her eyes widened, her jaw froze, her throat swallowed, and the mask returned. But he saw it. A second. 1 second of truth. Rice cakes with red beans were served last. Cho ate in silence. He didn't cry this time, but he closed his eyes. Inspector Hae-jin took a rice cake. She broke it open. She looked at the filling, took a bite, chewed, and froze. Completely. Not just her face, her whole body, as if someone had pressed pause. She put the dumpling on the table, stared into space, then quietly asked who had cooked it. Cho said it was Master So, the local chef. Hejin nodded. She didn't say anything. She finished the pastry. She didn't take a second one. The banquet ended late. Daniel was cleaning up the kitchen with the team, tired, happy. Erdi fell asleep standing up. Yuna was laughing from nervous tension. Sora sat in the corner and smiled, quietly, to herself. Minsu stood next to Daniel, shoulder to shoulder. She was counting the dirty bowls. And suddenly, she turned to him and hugged him, quickly, tightly, for a second. Her arms around his back, her face against his shoulder, for a second. Then she let go. She went back to the bowls, as if nothing had happened. But it had. It had happened. The morning after the banquet, a message arrived. Inspector Yoon Hae-jin requested a meeting with Master So, in person, unaccompanied, at the estate's guest house. Daniel went alone. Minsu wanted to go with him. He asked her to stay. For the first time, he asked her, rather than simply agreeing with her decision. She looked at him. She nodded. But her eyes were anxious. The guest house stood deep in the garden. Small, clean. Hae-jin sat at a low table, without men's clothing, in a simple women's hanbok, without makeup, without a mask. Her face was young, tired, beautiful in the way you only see when a person stops hiding. She looked at Daniel, straight on, without blinking. She said it was a red bean cake, that her mother used to make them, a long time ago, when Hae-jin was 6, 7, before her parents were executed on false charges, 24 years ago. She hadn't eaten anything like it in 24 years, and last night, in the county she had come to investigate for theft and corruption, she was served a pie that tasted just like her mother's, and she wants to know how. Daniel sat across from her. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she fell silent, he said he didn't know about her mother, that he'd been following a recipe, a standard one. Rice dough, red beans, honey, steamed. Nothing special. But sometimes a simple dish hits just the right spot in a person's soul. Not because the cook knows, because the dish remembers. Hae-jin looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was an unusual man, that she had spent 10 years inspecting counties throughout the kingdom. She had seen thousands of peasants, officials, merchants. None of them spoke like that. None of them cooked like that. And none of them looked at her like that. As a person, not a title. Daniel didn't look away. He said that titles meant nothing to him. There are people. And every person has a dish that brings them home. His job is to find that dish. Hae-jin paused. Then she asked what he knew about the war in the north. Daniel said he'd heard rumors, nomads, the border, a possible invasion. Hae-jin said they weren't rumors. There would be an invasion in 6 months, maybe sooner. The steppe horde is gathering at the northern passes. The royal army is weak. Half have deserted. The other half are starving. The war will be long and terrible, and villages like Tebek Gol will be the first to suffer, in the army's path, without walls, without protection. Daniel listened. A chill crept down his spine. 6 months, maybe sooner. Hae-jin said she wrote in her report that Choi County is in order. Taxes are being collected. The economy is running. That's half true. Choi is stealing. But Choi is also the only one in the district who is feeding people at all. Thanks to Master So. She said she would report to the king that in the White Cedar Valley there is a resource, a human one, a cook who works miracles out of nothing, and that this resource must be preserved. She said she would stay until the end of winter, for personal reasons. Daniel understood. Personal reasons are rice cakes. Personal reasons are the scent of childhood. Personal reasons are the first time in 24 years you've felt at home in a place where you... He nodded, said he'd be glad to. Jin nodded, stood up. The conversation was over. She turned at the door, said he had to prepare for war. Not with swords, not with walls, with what he knows how to do. Daniel asked, with what? She said, food. Armies march on their stomachs, and the side that feeds better wins. She left. Daniel sat in the empty guest house. War. In 6 months. He thought of Han, of Junho, of Minsu, of Yoon and her laughter, about Sora and her herbs, about Eri and her nimble hands, about Village Head Park, about the fisherman Taesong, about old Mrs. Bay who came every day for porridge. 120 households, 500 to 600 people. His people. Not because he had conquered them, because he fed them. He stood up. He went out. The snow crunched under his feet. The sun hung low. Cold. Winter. He was walking home and thinking. At his restaurant in Seattle, the biggest banquet was for 200 people, a corporate event. They cooked for 2 days straight, 8 chefs, 3 assistants, and they managed it. Here, he had 5 people, a pantry, potatoes, knowledge, and 6 months to feed an army, to stop a war with a bowl of soup. Madness. He smiled. Madness is his specialty. They were waiting for him at home. Minsu at the threshold, Hana in his arms, Jungho beside him. The boy stood and watched. When Daniel approached, Jungho took a step forward, 1 step, and said, Appa, welcome home. For the first time, consciously, not by accident, not out of shame, directly, looking him in the eyes, Appa. Daniel stopped. He looked at his son, at this thin, serious boy with the eyes of an old man, who had been watching for 8 months, testing for 8 months, deciding for 8 months whether this man could be trusted. And he decided. Daniel crouched down. He placed his hand on Junho's shoulder. His palm was heavy, warm. He said, You're home. Jungho didn't pull away. He didn't shake off the hand. He stood there, and something flashed across his face. Not a smile, a shadow of relief, like a person who had finally set down a bag they'd been carrying for too long. Minsu stood and watched them. Hana, in her arms, was watching too, serious. Then she said that Appa was late for dinner, and she considered that a bad thing. Daniel laughed. He picked up Hana. She squealed. She clung to his neck. Minsu stood there and smiled. Smiled. For real. Widely. Openly. For the first time. The first real smile in 9 months. In 6 years. In her whole life, maybe. Daniel looked at her and thought that for the sake of that smile, it had been worth dying behind the wheel in Seattle and waking up from a kick to the ribs on a dirt floor in a world he didn't know. It was worth it. Every second was worth it. They entered the house, all 4 of them, together. A year had passed. The So house stood strong. 2 rooms, a separate kitchen, heated floors, tiles instead of straw, a gate with the inscription, So's Hearth. A yard beyond the gate, tables under a canopy, a bread oven, a smokehouse, a cellar packed to the ceiling. The potato fields beyond the village yielded a 3rd harvest. The mill stood by the stream. Stone millstones ground the grain. The bakery next to the mill handed out bread every morning. Children came to the bakery at dawn. They received a piece of bread for free. There was one condition, to sit at a table in the tavern and listen to a lesson. Minsu taught them to read. A school in the tavern. Minsu herself, the daughter of a village teacher. She had known the alphabet since childhood. When Daniel proposed, she looked at him for a long time. Then she said her father would be pleased. And she began to teach. 12 children every morning. They sat at the tables, ate bread with honey, and learned to write with sticks in the sand. Hana sat among them, the top student, serious, focused. She wrote the letters slowly and correctly. Jung-ho helped the younger ones. He showed them how to hold the stick. Patient, attentive, 9 years old, no longer a child, already an assistant. Eri became Daniel's right-hand woman in the kitchen. In 6 months, she mastered more than some chefs do in 5 years. Golden hands, a sharp memory. Once she ruined a batch of bread. She hadn't kept a close enough eye on the oven. 30 loaves were burnt. Eri stood before the black bricks, her face pale. Her hands were shaking. She waited for a blow, waited for a shout, waited for the words, "Pack your things and leave." Daniel walked over. He looked at the bread. He looked at Eri. He turned to Min-soo and Yuna, who were standing nearby. He said loudly, "It's my fault. I didn't explain the temperature well. We'll try again tomorrow." Eri looked at him, her mouth open. Her eyes were wet. She knew he was lying. He had explained the temperature 3 times. She had simply dozed off by the stove. Tired. She hadn't paid attention. Her mistake. Hers alone. And he took the blame for it, in front of everyone. Eri went behind the hut. Daniel didn't follow her. He gave her time. An hour later, she returned. Her eyes were red. Her back was straight. She walked over to the stove. She began kneading a new batch. Silently. That night, for the first time in her life, she slept peacefully. Daniel knew this because Min-soo had told him. Min-soo noticed everything. Yuna ran the dining room like an orchestra. She knew every guest. She remembered every name, every favorite dish. When someone walked in, she greeted them with a smile that was meant just for them. Not a perfunctory one, a genuine one. Yuna smiled, and the world grew a degree warmer. She stopped crying at night. Not right away, gradually. The soup Daniel made for their anniversary didn't erase the pain. The pain remained. But a space opened up alongside the pain. The kitchen, the table, the people who came every day. Laughter, work, hands full of work. And the pain receded. It didn't go away, it receded. Sora became part of the family. Not just formally, in essence. She would come at dawn with a basket of herbs. She'd stay until evening. She'd eat at the communal table. She'd talk. Not much. But she'd talk. With Yuna. With Min-soo. With Hana, who asked her endless questions about every flower, every leaf, every beetle. Sora answered patiently, in detail. She had never talked to a child before. Didn't know how. But Hana didn't give her a choice. Hana didn't give people a choice at all. She decided you were her friend, and that was that. No appeal allowed. One morning, Daniel got up and saw them, Sora and Hana, sitting by the potato patch. Sora was showing Hana a beetle. Hana was listening with the face of a scientist at a conference, serious, nodding, taking it all in. Daniel stood in the doorway and watched. And the storeroom inside him trembled quietly, as it always did when things were going right. Hyejin stayed, not just until the end of winter, longer. She lived in the Che guest house. She came to the diner every evening. She sat in the corner. She ate in silence. She observed. With each passing week, the porcelain mask cracked more and more. She began to talk. With Min-soo about numbers and governance, with Sora about herbs and their properties, with Yuna about people and their habits, with Eri about resilience and patience. She talked with Daniel at night, when the tavern closed and everyone left. She stayed. She drank tea. She talked about the capital, about the court, about the war, about how her parents were taken away at night, and she heard her mother's scream through the wall, about how she learned not to cry at 7 and forgot how to cry by 20, about how food was a function for her, fuel for the body, and that for the first time in 24 years, she thought yesterday at dinner that the rice was delicious. Just rice. White, warm, delicious. Daniel listened. He poured tea. He was silent. Sometimes silence is the best dish a cook can serve. War came in the spring. Not in 6 months, as Heijin had said. Sooner. A messenger rode in at dawn. The steppe horde had crossed the northern passes. The royal army was retreating. Refugees were heading south. Thousands of them. Hungry, angry, desperate. The villages in their path are burning. In a week, they'll be here. The village froze. Fear hung in the air like the smell of smoke. People were rushing about, gathering their belongings, hiding grain. Some had already fled, south, as far as the eye could see. Daniel gathered everyone, in the courtyard of the tavern. Minsu, Yuna, Sora, Eri, Hejin, village head Pak, fisherman Taesong, Choi Do-kwon, who had arrived from the estate with a pale face. Everyone. Daniel stood before them. He said they wouldn't run. Minsu turned pale. Yuna pressed her lips together. Sora placed her hand on the knife at her belt. Heijin stood with a stony face but nodded. Choi remained silent. Daniel said there was nowhere to run. It was the same in the south. War doesn't pass anyone by. It sweeps through everything. The only chance is to stay and face it. Not with swords. He looked at Heijin. She said, "Armies march on their stomachs." Daniel nodded. He said that in a week, people would come to the village. Refugees, hungry, frightened. Soldiers might be following them. Hungry too, scared too. A hungry man steals. A full man talks. Their task is to feed everyone who comes. Everyone, without exception. Madness. He saw it in their eyes. Feed thousands? With what? How? He explained. Potatoes. 30 sacks in the cellar. The last harvest. Rice. 20 sacks. The canteen supplies. Sauerkraut. Dried mushrooms. Dried fish. Flour. Salt. Everything there is. He'll open the pantry. Not for himself. For everyone. The supplies inside. Staples. Endless. Rice. Flour. Salt. Spices. Oil. He'll take things from the pantry at night, when no one is watching, as much as needed. That's how much he'll take. The pantry replenishes itself from cooking for others. The more he gives, the more he'll receive. A vicious cycle. Endless. As long as he cooks for people, the pantry won't run dry. You owe it. Feed them. That's it. That's what it was all for. Not for one family. Not for one village. For everyone who comes hungry. They prepared for a week, set up field kitchens, 3 huge cauldrons. Choi provided 2 from the estate. They gathered the third from whatever was available. They dug pits for fires. They gathered firewood. They chopped vegetables. They kneaded dough. Eri worked 16 hours a day. She didn't complain. Her hands flew. Yuna organized the distribution. Stations, lines, order. Sora went into the forest and returned with sacks of herbs, medicinal ones, for the wounded, for the sick, for the emaciated. Minsu counted, divided, distributed. Heijin took off her inspector's badge and became simply a woman who carried water and chopped cabbage, right there with everyone else. Choi Dok-wan stood in the courtyard of the tavern. He watched all this. Then he took off his outer robe, rolled up his sleeves, went over to the cauldron. He asked what to do. Village headman Park was crying and didn't hold back. Then he wiped his face and went to dig pits for fires. The refugees arrived on the 6th day. Not thousands, hundreds, but for a small village, hundreds felt like an ocean. Dirty, hungry, with children in their arms, with the wounded on carts, with eyes in which there was nothing left but exhaustion and hunger and fear. They approached the valley and stopped because of the smell. 3 cauldrons had been boiling since dawn. Potato soup, thick, hot, with garlic, with Sora's herbs, with chunks of meat from the pantry. Baskets of bread stood nearby, hot, fresh, from the bakery that had been working all night. The first woman approached the pot. Daniel poured her a bowl, full, to the brim. The woman looked at the soup, then at Daniel, then at the soup. She picked up a spoon. She tasted it. And her legs gave way. She sat right down on the ground, with the bowl in her hands, and she ate. And she cried. Like Hana on that first morning, like Yuna over her husband's soup, like Cho over the rice cakes. Tears from the food, tears from the fact that someone had cooked for you, personally, with warmth, with care. When the whole world is burning and falling apart, and someone stands by the cauldron and ladles soup for you. Others followed her. 10, 20, 50, 100. Daniel stood by the pot and ladled. Yuna directed the flow. Sora handed out herbal decoctions to the wounded. Eri sliced bread. Minsu counted the bowls and made sure there was enough for everyone. Heijin carried water. Cho stirred the soup in the pot with a huge wooden spoon. Awkwardly, clumsily, but he stirred. The cauldrons didn't run dry. Daniel would disappear into the darkness every 2 hours. He'd open the storeroom, take out sacks of rice, meat, salt, flour, drag them back. No one saw where he was going. No one cared. The main thing was that the soup didn't run out. 3 days. For 3 days, they fed people non-stop. People kept coming and coming. Daniel didn't sleep. 2 hours in 3 days. He stood by the pot, ladling, ladling, ladling. On the second day, soldiers arrived. Deserters, 20 men, armed, angry, hungry, ready to loot. They entered the village and saw the pots, and the people around them, and the smell. Daniel went out to meet them, alone, unarmed, with a pot of hot soup and a stack of bread. He set it down in front of the leader. He said the soup was hot and the bread was fresh, and that seconds were free. The leader looked at him, at the pot, at the bread. Steam rose. The smell hit his nose. The leader sat down on the ground. He took a spoon. He began to eat. The others sat down after him. 20 armed men ate soup and bread on the ground in front of the village cook's tavern. And the raid ended before it began. By the evening of the third day, 2 of them were helping carry firewood. 5 were repairing the fence. 1 stood by the pot, stirring the soup under the direction of Eri, who commanded them like a general. And he obeyed, because the soup was hot, and she was the real deal. On the 4th day, news arrived. The royal army had regrouped. The steppe warriors were stopped by the river, 2 days' journey to the north. The war was not over. But it did not reach the White Cedar Valley, not because the village was protected by walls or swords, because everyone who came hungry left full, and a full person doesn't burn down the house that fed him. On the evening of the 4th day, Daniel sat by the extinguished fire, alone, so tired he couldn't lift his arms. 3 days without sleep, 1,000 bowls of soup, maybe more, he hadn't counted. The door to the pantry inside him was open. He hadn't opened it. It opened on its own. He peeked inside. The shelves were full, fuller than ever. Every rack was packed. Bags of rice stacked to the ceiling, meat piled high in the freezer, spices in new jars that hadn't been there before. New packets had appeared on the seed rack. Chili peppers, tomatoes, corn, opened, ready to plant. He had earned them, with 1,000 bowls of soup for strangers. And in the far corner, behind the spice rack, a door with a sign stood open, for the first time. Beyond it was a corridor, short, dark. At the end of the corridor stood an old man, transparent, barely visible, in clothes older than this world. The old man smiled, quietly, like a man who had waited a very long time and had finally waited long enough. He said one word, in Korean, ancient Korean, which Daniel hadn't studied but understood. All right. And the door closed. The sign on it changed. The old characters vanished. New ones appeared. The debt is repaid. Feed him further. Daniel closed his eyes, exhaled, opened them. Minsu was sitting next to him. He hadn't heard her come over. She sat there looking at him, quietly. He turned toward her. She took his hand, with both of her palms, firmly. She looked into his eyes and said, "I don't know who you are. I don't know where you're from. I don't know how you do what you do. But I know you're my husband, and I want you to stay. Forever." Daniel squeezed her hands in response. He said he wouldn't go anywhere. Minsu nodded. She moved closer. She rested her head on his shoulder. For the first time, she simply rested her head there and closed her eyes. They sat like that, by the dying fire, in a village full of sleeping people who, for the first time in a week, had gone to bed with full stomachs. The snow had melted long ago. Spring had come. The air smelled of wet earth and smoke and something sweet. Somewhere in the house, Jung-ho and Hana were sleeping. In the next room, Eri was curled up on her mat with flour in her hair. Yuna had gone to a room, humming. Sora had disappeared into the forest as usual. Heijin stood on the porch of the guest house, gazing at the stars. And for the first time in 24 years, she didn't hate the silence. Chae-dok-won sat in his study, looking at the empty basket that had held rice cakes that morning, and he smiled. Village Chief Park was asleep, and he hadn't drunk today. For the first time in 10 years. The White Cedar Valley lay quiet and warm, encircled by mountains. Smoke from chimneys, light in the windows. Dogs barked lazily. Somewhere in So's house, embers smoldered in the hearth, and it smelled of bread. Daniel sat there. Minsu breathed evenly on his shoulder. Warm, alive, his. And he thought of a place far away, in a world that no longer exists, in a city called Seattle. Once, a tired cook fell asleep at the wheel and died, and woke up and began to cook, and didn't stop. And the pantry behind the door inside him purred quietly, like a cat, like the fire in the hearth, like a world that is finally sated. The debt has begun. The debt is being repaid. The snow has melted, and it is warm in the valley of the White Cedar.